Good afternoon and welcome to the Tempe City Council Work Study Session for October 19th, 2017 here in the Harry E. Mitchell Government Center. The first item on our agenda is our call to the audience for the issue review session items and the committee of the whole items. Audience members have up to 3 minutes to address the City Council. If you'd like to speak on an item, please fill out a speaker's card, which can be found in the back of the room. Please give it to our Deputy City Clerk, Dusty, or our City Clerk, and then we'll put you in line to speak. First item is a call to the audience. I have a couple cards. Darlene Justice. On deck, Deb. Then after Deb, Kim. Batting cleanup. No baseball analogy. Go Cubs. Oh, sorry.
Oh, well, that's maybe Lauren likes those.
Thank you very much. I'm talking today about Papago Park Preserve. I would really like to thank you, Mr. Mayor, and all the council members. I won't name all of you because I want to get a few more thank yous in too, but I really thank you all. I want to thank Don Bessler, Tony Miano, Craig Hayden, Bonnie Richardson, the Tempe Parks Commission, the different commissions, the Neighborhood Advisory Commission, everybody that's helped to move this along. I want to thank Tempe Parks Maintenance, Police Department, and the homeless coordinators for what they've been doing to help keep the park in the best shape they can. I have reviewed all the documents that are in your folder today concerning Papago Park Preserve, the memorandum from Don Bessler, the work study PowerPoint, the Papago Park Preserve resolution, the resolution for the election, and the city code. I think everybody's done a really, really good job of incorporating concerns from the public. I know the city code is something that can be changed at a later date, but all the other things, and even the city code from what I read, looks really comprehensive and really great. I want to thank you all very much for considering this. I know that you can't weigh yay or nay because it's going to the voters, but you all get to vote. And I think this will be a legacy for this Tempe City Council and community to make Papago Park a preserve. Thank you very much, and here's hoping. Thank you for the additional officer for the park. Really appreciate that too, very, very much. Thank you.
All right, Deb, and then after Deb, Kim.
I just want to say thank you to everyone for your support on this and for helping us keep the preserve a special place. Just this last weekend, there was another sighting of a bald eagle. We've confirmed with the zoo that it is, in fact, bald eagles. And so I think that helps reinforce that it's a special place worth working to preserve. I think the most important part is the thing that's going to the voters, and I really appreciate making that strong and something that will last in perpetuity and be here for many more generations to come. I see the ordinances as important but less important because of the timeliness of getting the thing on the ballot right now. Ordinances, I understand, can change in the future, but I really appreciate making sure that what goes to the voters is as strong as it can be. Thank you very much, and I really appreciate it. It's a special place.
Thanks. Kim, come on down. State your name and place of residence for the record, even though we know.
Hi, I'm Kim Gaffney Loza, and I'm going to be very redundant probably in this whole conversation because that's what I plan to say is the biggest thing is thank you. Tempe, I think, is really special in the fact that they listen to their residents probably more than any city that I've ever lived in before. And every city that I've lived in that has had a park like this that celebrates its natural environment has been really successful. It's been a draw. And I think it's every bit of as much a draw as any development that we would put in town. So I really appreciate this. I know this was a huge project for city staff, and it's been worked on for a lot of years. Mr. Bessler, Mr. Miano, Bonnie Richardson, and Craig Hayden, and everyone that's worked on this, I really appreciate it. And I think generations down the line will as well. And again, I thank you very much.
Thank you. Norgard Lassie. Lassie? I'm sorry. Is it Lassie?
Lassett. All right. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. My name is Lassett Nargwa. I reside on 122 East Garfield Street in Tempe. Thanks for letting me speak today, and thanks for having this important agenda item on the list about Papago Park Preserve. I'm an active user and probably a big fan of Papago Park. One of the reasons why I live, essentially, is in my backyard, and I wish to address the topic of making Papago Park a preserve. I applaud the city and staff, kind of following what most people have said, for your willingness to protect the park and really getting an effort. I know that both the whole group here, but also staff, and a lot of hours have gone into this. I feel that the proposed verbiage in front of you today might not be in the best interest of the public, though. The public forum comments that was gathered during the whole public input phase seem to have largely been ignored, as far as I can tell, and I pulled the document as recent as an hour ago. So unless it has changed within the last hour, there are some concerns in there. One of the items that I find it lacks sufficient protection for the park. So if you reference section 23-101, item C, and I'll read the quote here, it says, "A preserve will not contain traditional facilities or improvements associated with a public park, but may contain facilities or improvements that the city determines are necessary or appropriate to support its activities," end of quote. So what if in the future we decide to add a 400-car parking lot to be able to fit more cars at Tempe Town Lake and using Papago Park Lane for that? Is that an appropriate activity? What about if we follow Scottsdale's lead and build a Desert Discovery Center, or as has now been nicknamed, Desert Edge? There's an ongoing battle going on in Scottsdale right now that I would suggest that if you haven't already made yourself aware of, look into it. My fear is it doesn't protect against development. A separate section, it gives the city full jurisdiction to limit recreational activities without any reference to trails or maps. So if you look at section 23-111, item number 6, it states, and I quote, "Use of rolling non-motorized vehicles, including bicycles, roller skates, and inline skates, is prohibited where posted," end of quote. And the challenge I have with that language is it doesn't list anywhere where there is a map, it doesn't reference any trail names, it doesn't mention any user groups that were consulted about this. So one of the challenges there as well. And finally, I do applaud you guys for actually hiring an additional parks officer. I think that's great. Officer Ornelas has done a great job, but it was one guy. So, but the challenge I see with this, who's going to enforce all these rules? Because there's a lot of rules in this document. There's nowhere listed where the funding is going to come from, and there's already a struggle with kind of maintaining the current rules of the park, which I've spoken on other topics in the past regarding the safety in the park. So I hope the city will ensure no further building beyond existing facilities or footprint will take place, and also hope that the city will continue to allow skating, biking, hiking, disc golfing, as we can do today. And thank you for letting me speak, and thanks for trying to protect this park from development, both from public and private and the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Conley, John Conley. Please state your name and place of residence for the record.
Good afternoon. My name is John Connolly. I live in Scottsdale currently, South Scottsdale, Sky Song to be exact. Lived in the area for almost 30 years. In fact, lived in Tempe quite a bit of that time too. So former Tempe resident, but still stayed close. The reason that I live in this area is for Papago Park. It is a huge attraction for me, running, cycling, really enjoy it. I'm going to ask perhaps just to stipulate reiteration of Lass's comments. I think he said it pretty succinctly. Of course, I cycle in Papago Park, but part of that is mountain biking as well. So the trails are very important to me, and the mountain biking in particular. And I would appreciate a consideration for mountain biking use in there and continuing that as a use. I think it's very important for the area and as a continued draw, with an eye toward protection of the park as well, making certain that it remains natural, that we don't put any concrete sidewalks through it as other cities have done recently. That's the comment that I have. I appreciate the time that you give me to speak today.
Thank you. Next, Mr. Parrish, Carl Parrish. Please come forward, state your name and place of residence for the record.
Hi, my name is Carl Parrish. I'm a resident of Tempe, long-standing resident of Tempe. I'm representing Represent Us, which is a nonpartisan organization throughout the country. I'm the head of the Arizona chapter. And I'm here to discuss the Sunshine Ordinance and how we feel that election integrity is impossible without transparency. And we've come to a point in time in our society where a lot of members are concerned about foreign countries' influence in government, corporations' influence in government. There's swelling of distrust and feeling that government is happening to us, not that we're part of the government. And that things like the Sunshine Ordinance are necessary iterative steps to getting us to the place where we feel confidence in our democracy again. That's what I have.
Thank you. Mr. Garrett Mack, please come forward. State your name and place of residence for the record.
Hi, Garrett Mack, 1942 East Velvet Drive, Tempe. I really just wanted to present in front of you guys, just kind of echo the sentiments about Papago Park that have been already addressed. I'm first and foremost, I recognize and I identify with the spirit, I think, of the proposed amendments, but I don't think, I think that the amendments are almost presented in haste, and so there hasn't been a lot of thought into, you know, downriver effects of the proposed amendments to the park. And so my fear is that, you know, personally, the recreation that I enjoy, cycling and running, will be, you know, in part limited in some way. And I don't think anybody who is, you know, the parties who have brought this this legislation forward, I don't think that their interest is to limit that either. I think what we all want is the same thing, which is to protect the native landscape that exists. And I think ideally we'd like to just sort of do a snapshot in time of what we have now, and, you know, no more building structures. So that's all.
Thank you. Morgan Dick. Please come forward, state your name and place of residence for the record.
Hello, everybody. My name is Morgan Dick, and I'm here representing the Arizona Advocacy Network. But we're talking about the campaign finance proposal. So by way of explanation, imagine a televised campaign ad. At the end, the candidate appears on the screen and says, "I approve this message." So you know his or her own campaign committee paid for this ad. Other television ads may simply say, "Paid for by Tempeans for a better Tempe." We believe that this charter amendment simply asks for Tempeans for a better Tempe, or any other independent expenditure group, to disclose who they really are, a person, group of people, or an entity. In other words, this proposal does not affect or change how direct contributions to candidates' campaigns are accounted for or reported. This charter amendment aims to provide transparency to independent expenditure groups who do not currently have to disclose their original source. Arizona has seen a huge increase in unaccountable dark money spending in the last 2 election cycles. Unfortunately, this mirrors the national trend, and local elections are likely to be the next victim. Tempe need not wait for someone to pour money into one of its elections while hiding behind a meaningless name. You can act now, as other cities like Austin and Denver have recently done. You absolutely have the authority to do this. First of all, local elections are a matter of local control. In the recent case, the state versus the city of Tucson, the Arizona Supreme Court reaffirmed, and I'm quoting here, "The method and manner of conducting elections in city is peculiarly the interest of local and the subject of local interest and is not a matter of statewide concern." The court has been consistent on this point for decades. Second, disclosure ordinances do not violate the First Amendment, as the Supreme Court has explicitly held in its Citizens United decision. Justice Kennedy wrote the following opinion of the court: "The First Amendment protects political speech and disclosure. Disclosure permits citizens and shareholders to react to the speech of corporate entities in a proper way. This transparency enables the electorate to make informed decisions and give proper weight to different speakers and messages. With the proposed charter amendment, Tempe is simply giving the voters an opportunity to make a more informed decision. AZAN staff supports this proposal. We have worked on some technical concerns with the draft ordinance, and staff in the working group have worked diligently to resolve those concerns. One important thing to remember is the only thing before you today is the charter amendment. If others have minor or technical concerns with the draft ordinance, there's plenty of time to resolve those concerns between now and when the voters hopefully approve the charter amendment. We remain committed to working with the stakeholders and to resolve any such concerns. The only question now is whether the voters of Tempe have the right to know who is trying to influence their votes. We believe they do, and we believe the voters should be able to decide for themselves to adopt this charter amendment.
Thank you. Ms. Doris Marie, is it Provine? Please state your name and place of residence for the record. Hi.
Doris Marie Provine, Tempe, 712 East Geneva Drive, right next to Elizabeth Higgins' former abode. I'm from New York State, and that was a place where you never could figure out what was going on, who was doing anything, and nobody ever wanted to go to Albany. I came to Arizona, and it's like the environment around here. Things are much clearer. The skies are clearer, the rocks are there, you know what's on the ground. But it's also has a reputation for being a pretty corrupt state at the state level. I want Tempe to stay away from that piece of the reputation, and I think that this charter amendment is a step in that direction. One of the things that I think is really important about this is that we're talking about kind of a preventive medicine here. This whole issue of dark money at the local level is going to increase. It's on its way in. So this is a way of avoiding trouble in the future by having kind of a deterrent to people using our elections at the municipal level to influence policy. Also, Tempe is really growing. The level of development is almost scary to somebody even who's only not lived here my whole life. I'm still amazed at that. And that means there's a lot of money out there ready to help influence elections. And people know this. And so I think the way to enhance transparency and trust in this government, in this particular government, the Tempe City Council, is to have this sunshine ordinance, to have this charter amendment adopted, because I think people will, not everybody's going to do the research, but they know that that information is available. I think the ordinance is relatively clear. I wanted to echo the thoughtful research that Morgan Dick has done as a part of the Arizona Advocacy Network, although I am actually here in my own capacity. So thanks very much, and thanks for pronouncing my name right. That doesn't always happen.
It's legible. That was good.
There you go.
At first, because it was legible.
Good one.
All right, that's all the cards I have. Is anyone else in the audience wishing to address us on any of the items listed on the issue review session or the work study? Could you please get my attention? Seeing none, I'll close that portion, and I'll go to the first item. If Marge and Mr. Palmer could come forward regarding the federal legislative principles. Welcome, and thank you for coming all the way from Washington, D.C.
Thank you.
I'm sure it's a little clearer out here, as the last speaker mentioned. I've heard all the chaos that's going on back in D.C.
The Mayor, council members, I'm Marge Zilla, Government Relations Officer for the city. I'll have Steve Palmer introduce himself.
Steve Palmer with the government relations firm of Van Scoik Associates in Washington, D.C.
So in item 2A, you'll find for your review Tempe's federal legislative principles that'll finish out the remainder of this year, and they'll go into 2018. Before we begin discussion on that component, I'll turn it over to Steve to provide a DC update.
Mayor and council members, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. We are actually having great weather in Washington. You can actually see blue sky right now, so it's a change. But what I'd like to do is touch on some of the activities that are going on in Washington, the major legislative activities, and what we've been doing on behalf of the city within the context of those issues. I'll try to refrain from commenting about tweets or private jets or Russian investigations, although that seems to be on a daily, hourly basis, probably dominating much of what we all hear about. So, of course, we know about healthcare reform. The first priority that came up this year was about repeal and replace. And like most majorities, new majorities in Congress, supermajorities in this case, with the president, they overreach. And the repeal and replace, as we've seen, has failed. There's no bipartisan support for doing that. However, there is now the inklings of the first kernels of effort to try to develop legislation that can subsidize the exchanges and bring those back and make those solvent for the rest of the year, or at least for going forward until they can figure out bipartisan Obamacare reform. That likely is going to be uncertain for the remainder of this year because it's probably not something they'll be able to address until they come to the continuing resolution at the end of the year. So we all need to stay tuned on that. Tax reform is now the current issue du jour, and it's likely to dominate the legislative agenda for the remainder of this year. The focus has been on refining and simplifying the tax structure while reducing rates for corporations and individuals, all to be determined. The principles that were set out in June were set up by 6 people, the head of the National Economic Council, Treasury Secretary, leadership in the House and the Senate, and those principles are now being translated into legislation. Nobody's seen that legislation yet. But the city, 2 of the issues that the city has been focused on and interested in is the deductibility of municipal bonds. Nowhere have we seen any indication that that's going to be affected. So that still should stay in place, obviously until the bill is signed into law, anything could change. And the deductibility of state and local taxes, the property, the sales, and the income taxes that we all pay. That is going to be affected, at least as of today, that we don't know what that is going to be, but there's talk about some sort of deal that will appease some of the people who are in high-cost states. So what's happening today on that? And today, in fact, the Senate is voting on a budget resolution, which is a necessary mechanism so that the Senate can ultimately pass tax reform with just 51 votes as opposed to 60 votes. So they're going through the process of trying to get a budget passed. You've heard about that every year, whether they can or can't. This year it's imperative, otherwise they face a 60-vote margin on tax reform. Why does that matter? Because each one of these deductions that they're trying to eliminate or reform has a constituency. I care about this one, you care about that one, and they need to be able to hold their majority together as much as possible to be able to pass that bill. And one of the major concerns is that the Senate version of that tax reform right now calls for over 10 years, it's deficit, they don't do any kind of offsets or reductions, so over 10 years it will increase the federal debt by $1.5 trillion. Whether that can pass muster among the conservatives and the Freedom Caucus, it remains to be seen, but that's the vehicle they're voting on this week. Now they're going to move quickly on tax reform next because they're going to see that that's going to be a big hurdle for them to have to get over. They're going to start as early as next week with the legislation to actually have tax reform move through the House Ways and Means Committee, and the House will vote on it very quickly after that because they want to be able to go home and tell their constituents they streamlined, they cut taxes, they did all these things after going through the process of a hard vote on deficits. So it's still going to be a difficult vote. It's still going to be a bill that's going to take several months, if not longer. The president said he'd like to have it done by August. It's now October. It's not going to happen probably until the end of the year, maybe next year. We'll continue to watch out for those deductibility issues, though. Tied to tax reform, but following that is going to be the infrastructure initiative. If you remember, the president campaigned on the fact that he wanted to have a $1 trillion investment in infrastructure over 10 years, not just transportation, but pipelines, electrical grids, schools, hospitals, VA hospitals. So it was all encompassing. But of that $1 trillion, it was assumed that only $200 billion over 10 years would be federal new spending, and the rest would come from the private sector. Well, just again, as recently as yesterday, the president was quoted as saying, "I don't like public-private partnerships." And as a result, it's thrown the whole concept into chaos. How are they going to get to that kind of big federal investment or new investment in infrastructure without new direct spending, which is going to be a challenge? The real likelihood that if this is going to be successful, and it hinges on tax reform, is that they will find a way, they're talking about trying to find a way to bring overseas profits. U.S. companies have profits that they parked overseas as much as $3 trillion, they say. And if they can bring back even as little as $100 billion or $200 billion at reduced tax rates that I as a company CEO want to bring back and do good things with, then ultimately that could finance the infrastructure initiative. And how that will be done, I can't tell you. People are saying, that could go through for transportation through the Highway Trust Fund, could go other ways, but that's yet to be determined. For this year's budget, real quick, many of the programs that the city cares about are being funded through the fiscal year appropriations bill. And the 2018 fiscal year is where we are. Those bills, the bills have all passed the House. The Senate has got their versions ready to go. We're under a continuing resolution until December 8th. So between now and Christmas, they're going to try to reconcile all the differences. And I will say that at this point in time, the majority of the programs the city cares about, the Community Development Block Grant Program, the Homeless Partnership, the transportation programs, Congress has, and the homelessness programs, Congress has rejected those proposed cuts that the President made earlier this year. Ironic that at the same time he's proposing $1 trillion for infrastructure, he's cutting so many infrastructure programs in their annual basis, like Department of Transportation by 13%. Congress is really rejecting those. And so programs like the streetcar are in all likelihood in very good shape. Both bills in the House and Senate have enough money to fund the streetcar, the last remaining increment of funding, federal funding, for that project. And that will then be then sent to the Department of Transportation for them to allocate later this year, early next year. It's a challenge because Congress can't earmark, so they can't designate $25 million for the Tempe streetcar. So the lobbying process continues not only with the Congress to make sure they fund the program, but at DOT and the Federal Transit Administration to make sure they understand why it's regionally and nationally important. Finally, we work with the city on grants. Not only do we send grant information to the city, to the staff, and they share with the departments, but we are looking for new funding sources for programs that are important: infrastructure, human services, youth programs, homelessness. We're trying to identify ways, and if not, are there ways in which we can create new pots of money so that the city can compete for those as well. There's always the possibility earmarks return, but until that happens, we have to work within those competitive grants. So the bottom line is there is a lot of change going on in Washington, but not to the programs that the city cares about and is really considers to be vital to its future. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Palmer, or any questions on our legislative agenda? Yes, Robin?
No, I mean, I already gave my 2 cents to Marge, so I think you've already relayed that. And I just want to say I really do appreciate you being there, fighting for us and keeping us on the up and up of what's going on. Because I think it's really important that we continue to advocate for what's important for Tempe, especially I know when we went through the scare of CDBG dollars and some of the great work that we've been able to do with that, and the people that we really are positively impacting because we have those funds. So I just say if you see something on the radar, just keep us in the loop, because that's what really, I think, makes a difference.
Vice Mayor,
so I appreciate having you there.
Thank you very much. And I will say your active involvement when you came in March and the mayor came in January, those kinds of trips are very, very helpful, because we can do what we can do, but you can do so much more in just terms of communicating the city's priorities. So thank you for coming.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for your time today, too. All right, next item on our agenda is streetcar project. Mr. Iverson, new role. Ms. Seiler.
Eric Streetcar Iverson. That's your middle name. I don't know, I do miss the bike days.
Yeah.
We did have some good times.
Seems like it was easier.
It might have been a little bit.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Shelley Seiler, Deputy Public Works Director for Transportation. And with me tonight this afternoon is Eric Iverson.
City Tempe Transportation.
And Eric was, just to announce, if you haven't already heard, Eric was recently promoted to our transit manager. So he will be taking on that new role with the retirement of Mike Navarez. So we're here tonight for the 23rd update on the Tempe streetcar, and I will turn it over to Eric.
Thank you, Shelley. So yeah, this is the 23rd update on the streetcar project over the, that's it, over the last several years. And tonight is an update. We have no requests or action items that we're asking for you. And we are scheduled to attend and give a presentation in December at your December 7th meeting. So these are the items that we wanted to go through tonight. We want to give you a little update on where we're at with our 60% plans, the design progress that we have been sharing with our boards and commissions, as well as we had a public meeting. There's some utility relocation work that's been happening, as you all know, in the downtown. We wanted to update you on that. Give you a little bit more information on the business assistance and outreach that will be happening during the life of the project construction that we have mentioned before, but we have more detail, and we will provide more at the December 7th meeting. And then a little update on our financial status of the project as we are getting into our final design, going into the 90% plans. There's some firmer numbers that are showing up. So just to remind everyone, the project is the 3 miles in our downtown. This is the map of the alignment, connects to our, the blue line is the map of the alignment, connects to light rail at 3rd and Mill as well as at Apache and Dorsey. We also want to remind you, we have our vehicles on order, the hybrid battery capable vehicles, 14 stops with this project. And then one thing that has been a real point of our community outreach right now is locating the traction power substations for the project. Those are our propulsion houses that you have with light rail and you have with streetcars. So we're going through that analysis now of where those need to be and working with our neighbors and stakeholders and property owners on that. Yes, Robin?
Eric Streetcar Iverson. Can I ask one quick question?
Yeah.
Are those the vehicles that we suggested, the smaller ones of the 3 that I just wanted to?
Yeah, so those are still the Brookville 69-foot battery hybrid, yeah. So those 4 TPSS locations, we're working really closely with our partners, property owners and neighbors that would be affected by these. And 2 of the locations really we have, they're pretty determined and set. And 2 of them we are still in more of a design phase and really reaching out to the neighbors to understand what we can and can't do with those particular locations.
Which 2 are set?
So I had another slide, but yeah, so I'll go into that, and I think the next slide, or one after this one. A little bit of update on the public involvement. As I mentioned earlier, we did have a public meeting in September to share the information, some of which we're sharing with you tonight, and also just to share the information of where we're at with the 60% design of the project. We also hosted and will be hosting regularly a Meet the Contractor opportunity. So people along the route, users, property owners, people that are interested in the project can come meet the contractor and have conversation. We want those to be informal, and so we're making those available regularly. We had another one this week, I believe, at Pita Jungle. So then we also are reaching out to all the boards and commissions that are interested in this project. Those are listed here. And we just wanted to categorize some of the feedback that we're receiving now. People are kind of moving, seems like the public's moving into this phase of understand this project is real. They want to know what's going to cost to ride it. Some of the traffic and operational impacts, they want to know. There's questions about future possible extensions, as well as some of the specifics like bike access and ADA access. So more specifically getting to Councilmember Navarro's questions about the TPSS, this is a visual of what those look like. This is one in Mesa. These are the 4 locations that we're looking at. We want to mention again that 2 of them are pretty determined. The 9th and Mill location, we're working really closely with ASU, and then the Dorsey and Apache, we're working with folks from Hudson Manor as well as the adjacent properties there next to the Nexa development, that one is. These are large utility boxes. Again, they're the housing devices for the propulsion of the vehicles themselves. So they're 40 by 12 feet. That's the dimensions of the larger structure. There's a lot of options on how we treat these in the context of where they're at. So we just want to make sure that you're aware of that and that we are working with folks to make sure that it does blend in as best aesthetically and architecturally as possible. So some of the opportunities we're listing here, we think there's also a possible future public art opportunity with these as well.
Nice.
And then this is one, yeah.
Sorry, Mary. Just one quick question. On these, and it's come up before, I've asked, on the barriers around the propulsion devices, is there ability to have vegetation growing around those barriers, or can vegetation touch the screening of those barriers?
It can touch the screening, so you can't even see the actual TPSS in the visual
right
here. And you don't want vines on the actual utility. These are basically like larger traffic boxes, so you don't want vines or things attached to it, but you can have stuff really pretty close. There's some clearances that we need to have because of electrical stuff going on in there, but you can get pretty close. And we do know, we have heard some feedback that some of these, they're located in areas that maybe they could have some public access near or around them. For example, the TPSS that's located here at Dorsey and Apache. So people could potentially go over adjacent to these, not to the TPS itself, but to the landscaping itself, and be able to, take a break.
You could use vegetation to screen the screen.
Correct.
Solid
mean,
vegetation
basic.
around. I know there's the category of a tree here, you still see the screen. That's what I'm trying to get to is a solid, like a bougainvillea or something that goes, you see on property lines, so to speak. They can rise high, but I don't know if that's.
Like perimeter fencing with
Exactly.
something that maybe grows on the fence itself.
Like a green screen. That is,
Right.
that is definitely possible.
Cool.
Now we have cost considerations, but we'll get into those later. So this is the vehicle
He's gonna
again.
get us all the money we need.
Yeah, thanks, Steve.
Need some landscape money?
So we just also are, want to remind the council that we do have the vehicles on order. This is the branding color scheme, as you have all seen many times or several times. And we're getting into the level now of having conversations with stakeholders and sharing with the public some of the details about what's happening inside the train. So we just want to make people aware that we are considering bicycle access. These will be completely ADA accessible, of course. Very easy boarding at the platforms. The vehicles we have, the smaller tier of rail vehicles, so these are 125-person capacity. And again, they are the hybrid battery that you all had requested. And then the next several slides are images of what our stops and shelters and public art concepts look like at this point in the 4 different kind of distinct zones of the project. So we have shared these with boards and commissions, and we've shared these with the public as of a month ago. Wanted to share them with you, and these are really meant to give you an idea of how these fit into the context of each particular area and particular stop along the route. There's 4 different zones that you all have seen a couple times. We selected these zones based upon community feedback and your feedback a year ago. So we have a Rio Salado area that has, on the north end, that has 3 stops. We have the downtown area that's Mill and Ash that has 5 stops, and then the Gamage Curve, which is really ASU and our historic neighborhoods, that has 3 stops, and then Apache Boulevard headed east, some of our historic neighborhoods as well as ASU and mixed-use developments happening there. These next 4 slides are, again, this kind of context of how the stop itself and the platforms and the public art fit into the context of each particular area. So this first one, starting on the north end, is the prototypical stop that you'll see on Rio Salado in the street itself. And the artist is Corinne Rolstadt out of Seattle. She's been working on the 3 stops. She's proposing and is advancing through all of her different review and public committees a concept of these abstract botanical sculptures that would be on the ends of the platform itself, kind of a greeting to the users as well as for any passersby. And then we want to point out that each of those sculptures, they would be different color scheme, but they would be roughly the same kind of sculpture at each of the 3 stops. And then we also want to indicate the size and scale of our actual streetcar stops here. This is a visual pretty close to what we imagine these stops to look like. You all have seen this before, but we want to emphasize, as we have repeatedly, these, like our trains, they're a little bit more intimate, the smaller scale. It's not the light rail, kind of the massive scale of that regional light rail system. These are a little bit more, sort of more elaborate bus stops, if you will. And this is the typical on Rio Salado. Yeah.
And just, I know we talked about those art and stuff, and it was mentioned through some neighborhoods. Obviously, we have a tradition down here, or a history of what Tempe was, and to be able to capture that history within families or just kind of embrace what Tempe was about way back when, and people that helped build Tempe and having that coordination. Is there still that possibility of using that art to capture some of that?
Yes. And that's a great segue to the next slide then.
Perfect.
Because we have, and I said this I had this listed in the public involvement summary, we have heard through the process, and we have heard from other stakeholders that wanting to emphasize Tempe has a rich history, of course, and the things you mentioned are important. And we think that this next artist that is the artist team in the downtown area, they're proposing 2 elements to their public art, and one of them is these, you can make it out here, photographs of individuals in our community. And so those are, the artist has been moving in a direction of really just trying to maybe not grab, but do a couple of public events in the downtown and have photographs of people on Mill Avenue and transit users and sort of the everyday kind of person in the community. We are providing information to try and look at the possibilities for specific references to some history. We want to have a little bit of caution there about really directing exactly what the artist will do, but we can come back to you with more information on the process for how we select those particular images, what the artist is proposing, and how we proceed to move forward with it. We do think, and we have heard some specific interest about some specific sites, specifically the 3rd and Ash and 3rd and Mill. And then another thing that's come up is we want to make sure that some of these are, because the Mill Avenue and the Ash Avenue stops are closer to the sidewalk, they're not in the middle of the road. So these are, as is indicated in this image here, they're really close to some nearby restaurants. So we want to make sure that all those immediately adjacent stakeholders are comfortable with what's being proposed. So that will be more to follow, more information for you. The other element with this particular art in the downtown is that they are looking at the shade structures that are above the platforms, being able to imprint whatever that material is, being able to imprint some, whether it's metal or glass or other panels, being able to have some sort of botanical images or something in those overhead canopies that could provide some sort of nice visual, as well as maybe some light play on the ground below it. Continuing further south in the Gamage Curve area, this is a typical of what the stops would look like. There's 3 stations. All 3 of those stops are listed. The artist is Mary Lucking. She's a Phoenix-based artist. And then she is proposing to really draw from the history of the neighborhood and the existing conditions and major architectural and aesthetic features of University Park and Maple Ash and others, as well as ASU buildings like Gamage and the Music Building. So you can see in her panels that she's proposing, these would be pulling directly from neighborhoods. So we're showing the old railroad tracks that travels adjacent to Wilson Art and Garden and Mitchell Park and University Park and Maple Ash. Trees, lots of trees, the George Ditch and University Park, so all those kinds of features she's showing in these panels that would be embedded directly into the shelter itself. She's also proposing to have, as the little image here is showing, small figurines that also would reflect the neighborhood, possibly native birds or musicians from ASU, little figurines that would be onto the shelter itself in those panels that she's proposing. So those would be a little bit more 3-dimensional and interactive. And then the final artist is a Tempe artist, Bobby Zakaitis, and he is proposing to, sort of like the Real Slot artist, put his artwork on the approaches to the platforms themselves, so kind of the entry points to the platform. And he is proposing, as the visual indicates here, he wants to use artifacts from Tempe and old utilitarian devices from our transportation system, like light poles, Mill Avenue, pedestrian lighting, to repurpose that, take it from our boneyard, repurpose that, and then add sculptural elements to those pieces. So here he's showing at the Apache and Paseo del Saber stop, he's showing old Mill Avenue light poles that we no longer can use, and he would repurpose those and put sculptures on the top of them. And then getting into, yes?
So, one concern I have just looking at the art displays, and I shouldn't take the images too literally, but want to make sure that we have enough shade at each stop so it's a comfortable waiting environment, and it's not necessarily, just underneath the structure may not be enough shade. So I hope that's going to be a consideration.
It is a consideration. It has, I will be honest, it has not been, it's something that we have shared with the artists. It's one of many factors, but it wasn't something that we required, that through the process of working with the artists, it wasn't something we required. It's something we should, I think, consider as we grow the system. It has come up, the issue of shade, and in fact, it came up earlier this week with Sustainability Commission. We are doing our best. We have tight constraints. We're on these platforms that are 12 to 10 feet wide, so we can only go 8 to 10 feet wide with overhead canopy structures. The shelters themselves, we're trying to get as wide as we can on those overheads. And then we are, and I haven't mentioned this, you can see it in this visual, we are proposing that some of the panels, of course, the upright panels that are in the shelter, people can stand behind those, depending upon where the angle of the sun is, to get shade. And we are also proposing that some of those could be green screens. So you can see, you kind of make it out that In some cases, maybe if their artist isn't using that panel, we can put in a green screen, like a vine that grows similar to what you see at the transportation center and at the light rail stations. And the third thing I wanted to mention is that we are proposing, even though we're in conversations about cost constraints on the project, we are proposing that all of these platforms have trees. So that also helps with the cooling as well as shade. I caution with that as well because, again, we're dealing with these small platforms, and we can only go so wide with trees, and they get clipped by passing vehicles and all that. Final thing on the shade is that we are trying to site these. Mill Avenue is a great example. We're trying to site these adjacent to existing trees, ficus trees or ash trees or oak trees, and maximize that adjacent landscaping that we have available.
That is one thorough answer, thanks.
Got the promotion.
So right away, we have started, we indicated at our last update that we were going to be notifying our property owners that would be affected by this project either through a temporary construction easement or through needed right-of-way. So those letters have gone out. I know some folks are reaching back out to us. This is limited right-of-way acquisition compared to a light rail project. And so we don't anticipate it taking too long, and we so far have had a pretty smooth process. We will let you know if there's any issues that do come up. So far, everything's going smoothly. Yes, Mayor?
On that issue, is there a way, and I know we did this when we did light rail construction, we worked with Tempe Schools Credit Union, now I'm sure it'd be Landings, to help some of the businesses that they needed help? You know, that temporary program we did?
Yes, and
For
someone has...
financial assistance. And I don't know if it's even viable, because I know we were a part of that, but I just thought I would ask.
Yeah, there's two programs, and I'm just getting up to speed on these, but there's two programs that are sort of offset of property taxes. It's that we did have as part of the light rail. So we are looking at both those programs. We're as you guys know, Marion Miller was brought onto this project. She had worked in her previous capacity with the chamber on that same program with is familiar with it as part of the Tempe Chamber's work with the light rail project. So we plan on introducing both of those.
Okay, good.
I don't know a lot of details.
No,
We
no,
can
that's
provide
fine.
that at
Long
the
as
December
it's-
7th meeting.
Long as it could be enough, just, I would let, I see Ann and members of the Tempe Chamber here.
Yeah.
As long as you can get that out, the information out to their respective, I mean, I think we want the ease of pain as much as possible during construction.
Yes.
That's all, just like we did before. I know, I heard we may be doing something, but.
Yeah, we just got
Over-excessive
it.
communication is good.
Yeah.
Over-excessive communication
Yes.
is good.
Okay.
That is good.
Construction schedule, you all have seen this timeline. This is, just want to remind you, there is some early underground utility work that's happening now, minimal disruption that's preparing us for track work. We are still anticipating in 2018 and 2019, that's when your major track work, shelters, art, landscaping would happen. And then vehicles would be delivered in 2020, and you'd see testing of vehicles in 2020. About a 6-month period for each vehicle it has to go through. And then we're still targeting operations for the last week in 2020. Business assistance. So in addition to some of the points that the mayor brought up, we have some specific campaigns that are further along. I mentioned the open hours for contractor. We will continue to do that. It's just an informal, friendly way to interface with our contractor. We have a separate Shop On campaign, which is really working with the DTA, working with other business owners outside of the downtown to promote business. We have different events that will happen with that. But it's really just kind of targeted, encouraging people to continue to utilize the businesses along the route. So that's the Shop On campaign. And then we will be also coming back to you on December 7th and reaching out in the upcoming months to prepare for the formation of our Community Advisory Board, which is made up of same process that we went through with light rail, but it's really made up of major property owners, stakeholders, neighbors, a collection of really diverse community members that would help guide monthly meetings to help guide our contractors' performance on the project and help staff to address any issues that come up. So they will be our community team for the duration of the construction of the project, so about 2 years roughly, that they would be formed. We want to have them formed by the start of construction in March, April timeframe. So we will be coming back to you with proposed names as well as a process for getting those folks on board. Finally, we have, we're at 60% design for the project. We have some early information that's indicating that we're over budget, which is not unusual for a project of this scale or for really any of our, even our bike path projects come in over budget when we get to this point in the project. So we just want to let you know that it is coming in over budget at this point. We do know the parameters the council has set for this project, and we are working through that. We anticipate if there's any major decisions or any issues that come up with that value engineering process that we're going through right now, that we would bring that back at your December 7th meeting. We're looking at everything for cost, keeping the cost contained at our 186 million. We're looking at everything right now to reduce those costs, which again is atypical for any capital project. So things like materials that we're using on the shelters, and the depth of disturbance for when we're digging and putting in track, and how many utilities we have to move for this project. All those types of things are on the table. We're looking at the work hours as well, because obviously that affects the contractor timeline. So all those types of things are being looked at. We just want to draw that to your attention. And we will, for any significant adjustments that we have to make, questions or concerns, we will bring those back at the December 7th meeting. And then next steps. Again, we will be back December 7th. We are moving into our 90% plans for the project. We anticipate those to be completed by the end of the year, beginning of next year. We will continue with some of the early utility work that you see on the road today, and then we want to come back to you at December 7th, and over the next several months work on forming the Community Advisory Board. And that's it.
Great. Councilman Granville.
Yeah, first off, great presentation. I'd read it before. It's equally good the second time. The only thing that I would just add is, so right now we've got, was it like 3 point something miles of streetcar. I'm not sure, I was surprised, I had not ever seen Wi-Fi on the streetcar before in a presentation. It's a 10, 15-minute ride most of the time. I'm not sure Wi-Fi is a deal. But I would love to see it at the stations, so that while people are waiting, or if somebody just simply wants it, they can go to the station and use it. I would much rather see it, my own preference would be at the station stops than on the streetcar, since that way it becomes a community resource as well as a streetcar resource, as opposed to the 10 minutes someone's on a streetcar, okay, so your cell phone logs into the Wi-Fi instead of a mobile network.
Councilor Navarro, then Councilor Shapiro.
Just to add to that, I agree with that. I mean, it seems logical to have them at stations, but on the 10-minute ride, as we expand the system, I want the system to be able to have that capability, so I don't want to be short-sighted on that either.
This is something that, the Wi-Fi is something that is being brought onto the light rail system.
Right.
So yeah, we would want to, especially as the system grows, we would want to have that. So that's really what we're looking at. But we will explore the idea of it at somewhere all the stops.
Capability
Yeah.
is great.
At least the downtown stops.
Yeah.
Councilor Shapiro.
I was just going to say that given the rapidly decreasing cost of this, I would advocate for both. I mean, as someone who rides the light rail nearly every day, I mean, I'm at the light rail station for anywhere between 0 minutes and 5 or 6 minutes, whereas I'm on the train for much longer than obviously the streetcar route will be, but even on the streetcar route, 10 minutes is more time than people will be spending at stations. So I think if we're going to do the stations, I think we should certainly do the trains.
I want to thank staff on already thinking about camouflaging the power stations, the traction power stations throughout. I think that's great. You guys are thinking of that. I appreciate all the public art. I know cost could be an issue, but whatever we could figure out with shade, I think that would be fantastic. And again, thanks for the great presentation. Robin?
Okay. I would just say congratulations on your new assignment, Eric. Well deserved. Very excited. I feel really bad I didn't know that today, even though we were together today at lunch. So I kind of feel like a heel.
Half our day.
Yes. Anyway, just a couple of things. I think the only thing for me, I just really want to make sure we do everything we can when you talk about the minimizing construction impacts and the Shop On campaign, that we're really assisting those businesses downtown, and we're letting the public know that there's alternatives to get to where they need to go and to not deter them from coming downtown, because I know that's going to be a long time for construction to be going on. And I continually always get questions about what's the construction timeline. So I think the more we know, the better it is for us, so that we can continue to share that information, and really even our employees within the city. So I think that if they get asked, they are really familiar with what's going on, because I feel like we're all kind of, out there talking to public. So anything that we can do to kind of help increase that communication, I am all about doing that. I think you guys will do a great job.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next item is a permanent base adjustment election. Mr. Jones?
So I was just thinking about that.
Good evening, Mayor and Council.
Same.
Ken Jones, Deputy City Manager. This is just a brief discussion I'd like to have with you as a preview to an item that will appear on your November 9th regular scheduled meeting agenda. So we've discussed this briefly before, but we have to have a permanent base adjustment to our expenditure limitation in order to spend the revenue that the city brings in. I gave you in your packet some statistics and information, and I'll just give you a little overview of that again as we talk about this tonight. What I would need from you tonight is either some concurrence on the amount that we're going to ask for, or some suggestions to adjust that amount so what appears on your agenda is what you want to see. So the expenditure limitation was put into place by the legislature in 79-80. The 1979 formula that they used built in some increases in the base limit based on population and inflation, but it isn't keeping up with the rate of our revenue growth as most Arizona cities. I think 87% of Arizona cities have increased their expenditure limitation through a voter approval process, and the city of Tempe has done that twice now. We did that in 1996. We increased our expenditure base limit by 15 million, and then in 2002 by another 21 million. So this is not uncommon. As a matter of fact, for the city of Tempe, this is not even an issue. It isn't a increase in taxes. It isn't an increase in the budget.
Wait, repeat that one more time.
There will be no increase in property taxes. There will be no increase in sales taxes associated with this. What this allows you to do is spend the revenue that you currently bring in and that you're projected to bring in. There's no limit on the amount you can ask voters to increase this by. There's no limit in the frequency you can ask them. If you wanted to, you could ask them for $1 billion increase and just get it over with. But we know that the public will see that number, and it's easily understandable for us that this won't increase taxes, but it's shocking when you see numbers like that. So
Is it possible for those to be like the first words on the ballot?
This is not an increase.
Right, yeah.
Well, unfortunately, you served in the legislature. The way we have to word certain ballot initiatives, they basically say that. I mean, we have to word it a certain way, so it's our job, and hopefully and members of the audience and all of our constituents understand and help relay that message. This is not an increase. This is just to spend the money that we collect on behalf of our residents for continuing the quality of life that we provide.
we will explain that as clearly as we can in the ballot language we're allowed to write. And in the past, these propositions have been accompanied by comments from the public who either oppose or support the initiative. So we would expect that as well on the ballot, so that other people can say things that we may not be able to say advocating for something like this. So we have reached our current expenditure limitation. We have some credits from past underspending that we can use, but this is not something that we can put off. We definitely need to make this decision. We've put it off as long as we can. There was actually going to be an expenditure limitation brought to the City Council in 2008, and when the economy turned down, that was postponed because we cut our budgets. So we're back to where we were then. So the expenditure limitation permanent base adjustment that we propose putting on the ballot is for $30 million. Like I said, it was $15 million increase in 96, $21 million increase in 2002. We're requesting a $30 million increase. That would represent about a 45.7% increase. The last increase that was done in 2002 was a 47% increase. So we're in line with that.
I think, if I read the council, I think we're all in agreement. Go ahead and move forward with the
So
additional $30
the
million.
only real thing is, we expect this to last about 6 years. Depending on the economy, it may or may not. If you have some ideas that you think that we're going to get revenue that we aren't currently projecting, it's not built into this. So if we bring in revenue faster than we're projecting,
we can go back out.
Then you're going to have to go back
That's
out
fine.
sooner, that's all.
Lauren?
A quick question, the 2002 increase, what percentage of the voters approved that?
I
Do you
don't know that. I would have to look at that.
So your recommendation is to move forward with you're requesting $30 additional million?
Yes,
Based, and not an increase on any taxes, property, or what have you?
that's correct.
I think we're good with that.
Okay,
All right, you have the direction to move forward.
thank you.
All right. Next is Papago Park Preserve.
Oh, Cal in the back.
Miano.
Where's hair turned gray? He probably looks like a Dennis the Menace.
I can find any of his old baseball photos.
That would be kind of cool. He's got a hat on probably.
And Bonnie, Miss Richardson. Come on down.
Oh.
Should you go on light?
Because I got some.
Right.
All right.
Oh, hey.
Mayor, members of the council, Tony Miano, Deputy Public Works Director for.
Okay.
Sorry.
Are you sure?
Yeah. No, I didn't know if it was.
No, go ahead.
Yes. I have with me tonight Bonnie Richardson, who's the Public Works Principal Planner. We're here tonight to have a discussion about our proposal to turn Papago Park into a preserve. We're going to touch on the purpose of why Papago should become a preserve. We're also going to discuss extensive outreach and feedback we received from the community. Our intent is to keep this as public land. And in this intent, it's once this real property is placed as a preserve, it will go back to the voters only to remove it from a preserve. So if it gets moved forward, that's how
It's kind of like that now,
the direction
considering the federal legislation, but this is just another layer on top. Okay.
In your packet, there was 3 documents, and we just want to make sure that it was clear that the first resolution was basically to put this on our special election. And then the second resolution was to basically design this real property as a preserve. And then the third one is to amend the city code related to the preserve. So those were all attached to the documentation. So I just wanted to make sure that was, everyone got a chance to look at those. And with that, I will turn it over to Bonnie. And,
Good afternoon. I'm going to jump right in here and talk about your council's strategic priority. So we are looking at the quality of life performance measure 3.16. And we're looking to get very satisfied or satisfied responses from citizens about the quality of our recreation, arts and cultural centers, including our outdoor cultural centers. The approach to making Papago a preserve started in December 17, 2015, when council was presented with a petition requesting preserve status. Then on April 7, 2016, this council directed staff to prepare a draft charter amendment for review, and then to get input from Parks Recreation, Golf, Double Butte Cemetery Advisory Board, and have some public outreach to help define what was appropriate in terms of uses in a preserve. The purpose of the preserve, I think I've been here before and talked to you about the first point, that just like the Hayden Butte Preserve, we're attempting to preserve natural habitat, desert vegetation, historical and cultural items, and the sites. But we're also adding here, we do intend that to include providing cultural, educational, and recreational opportunities as well. And of course, it's designed in terms of the recreational value to heighten appreciation and enjoyment of our desert Southwest area. So we have here the proposed charter amendment, Article 11, preserves. And this defines what the preserve will be, and once it's in place again, it can only be, once it goes to the voters, it can only be removed by the voters. The resolution designating the real property, as Tony had mentioned, will be conditional upon approval of the charter amendment. And then we have the city code amendment. So that is where we will update preserve rules, regulations to make them consistent. And those changes, if Papago Preserve is created, both Papago Preserve and Hayden Butte will be following those same preserve code items. So here we're talking about, again, the lands in the preserve, and there are a lot of words on this slide. I think you've read the memo and also have looked into this. We may maintain our city facilities and also replace them. Again, we're trying to keep it in as natural a state as possible while still allowing for recreational enjoyment. And council may establish by ordinance or management plans to provide for additional opportunities within the preserve, as well as equestrian, pedestrian, and vehicular access. The exceptions to natural preserve limitations are right-of-way, utility access, city-owned flood control, and of course, items that would affect preservation of public health and safety. So the advisory board recommendations, again, included in your packet, some of them are listed here. We had a public meeting that brought quite a few people, and we had a good discussion about all of the opportunities and constraints that might come with a preserve. Here you see Papago Park Regional Master Plan, and this is also called Discover Papago Park. It was completed in 2010 with broad support from not just our community, but Phoenix, Scottsdale, and the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community. And then we also, through your council action, approved a collaborative management plan for that park. So this proposed Papago Preserve aligns with that plan. It's very well done. We think it's got the really strong bones about how we can do a good job in the preserve. So this is the illustration of what is in the proposed Papago Preserve. The yellow boundary everything within that boundary is owned by the city of Tempe. We have accepted existing non-desert parks from the preserve. So you will see that along the edges, Papago Park North and South, the Ramadas and the golf course are not included. And also not included is the water facility and the other parks along Papago. So we included as well, and the blue indicates what are the riparian areas. And those were designated through that Papago Park Master Plan. So what we've kept out of the preserve are state and federal properties. You see those in that lighter orange color. SRP, ASU properties, and private properties. And there is only one private property. It's that little red dot down in the lower right-hand corner. That's a property of about 200 feet by 200 feet, and it is not owned yet by the city. Important dates. So this gives you an idea of where we've been. Again, Neighborhood Advisory Commission, when we presented this to them, they unanimously voted that they felt this should go to the ballot. It was important for us, of course, to get the information you requested from the Parks Board. And so they worked on this over the last year. They received all the public comments, so they looked through all of that, and they made their recommendations. And those are what you see in the documents you have tonight. So after this work-study session, we're here to really answer any questions or take your comments. We have a regular council meeting on November 9th, which is where you have the opportunity to vote for a resolution. And then if it passes, the general election would be March 13, 2018. Yes.
Cool.
Yeah, just for clarity, I know there's been some people that brought up the use restrictions. Does it, can we put a parking garage in there one day and, all that stuff? Can you explain what the protection would do? And then also the ordinance, I believe we have some leverage to, if we find something that's deterring or damaging the park, we can craft ordinances to protect that. Am I correct?
That's right. That's right. And so I think that it's not that any private sector or commercial enterprise can purchase any property or use the property, but the city does have the right to make modifications. And again, the intent is not to take away preserve status, but there may be times when we would modify a portion of the park either to improve it or to provide a facility or an activity that the citizens and the council have indicated they would like to see.
For example, horse stables.
Right. Well, and so we did have a public opportunity for riding horses through there for years, and a lot of people really love that. They miss it. It's another opportunity to have eyes on the site. So if people are riding through there, they see activities.
Vice Mayor, then Colby.
You nailed exactly what I was thinking about too, Bonnie, because I love the idea of making sure that we are capturing the natural history and keeping that open space as where we can. And certainly don't want like a student housing project to go there or anything like that.
No.
But I do love the idea of having some flexibility if there is an opportunity in the future, so it's not so limiting that we're not able to do that. So it sounds like that is already worked into the wording that we're able to, because I think parks evolve. And I want to just make sure that we have the ability to evolve too, if we so choose and the community finds an opportunity that could be a really great fit. So I think that's great. And one of the things I love that's mentioned in here too is about the education piece and how important it is, because there's so much history there. There's so many really great things there. And if you go through there, I don't know, I mean, the signage is okay. I just think there's so many more things that we can do, wayfinding type things, and just really incorporate the history and education for so many people that walk through there. So anything that we can do, I'm all for, pushing that forward, preferably sooner than later, because I think that's really part of it. You want people to enjoy it and understand it and appreciate it.
And of course, signage is important. We just recently put up these signs in Lopiano Bosque. I think signs like that and interpretive signage talks about what's important about that park and what's unique, and also helps people understand how to take care of it.
Thank you.
Councilman Granville.
Thank you, Mayor. A couple of things. So since we would be sort of, outside of the butte, is anything else a preserve, designated a preserve right now?
Not right now. However, there are 2 buttes intended to be
there's
marked as a preserve.
one over by
And so it
Broadway
makes
Curve.
sense. So as I look through the sort of preserve statute language, it makes sense what was in there. There are some things that I'd ask you to consider because Papago Park's a little different than A Mountain. So for example, I'll just go through them really quickly. Sure. On 23-11, you've got no archery listed, except Papago Park has an archery field. Not in the Tempe portion, but in the Phoenix portion. And so,
Shoot into the Tempe.
well, not that, but just my concern is that Phoenix simply mirrors ours or something like that. And so maybe just something except in designated areas by the city, or something that makes clear that that's okay, but not some random person who sets up a target somewhere. The other one being is amplified sound. Particularly in Evelyn Hallman Park, there are people that, they just bring a stereo or they bring something. I mean, it is a park. Not to mention there's the Papago Amphitheater. I would assume the Papago Amphitheater would probably be okay for amplified sound since it's an amphitheater.
Right.
And so maybe just some, it is on the Phoenix side, but maybe just something to take into account the sort of intended, the existing amplified sound usages.
Okay.
And then I would say the other one is for the sale of food. I think it says food and beverages. Again, if somebody wanted to pull a food truck into the parking lot of Evelyn Hallman Park as part of a GAIN event, and we needed to permit that, I think we would say yes to that normally, but they would be in the preserve and technically I think couldn't do that under the way this is worded. So you might put something in there to make it, except in paved areas, or I don't know, however you think it works to preserve what we're currently doing. Tents is another one. I know tents and camping. There are Boy Scouts that have historically once a year done overnight camping in Evelyn Hallman Park.
Right.
Under the preserve rules now, that would no longer be allowed.
Well, that's not exactly
Okay, good,
true.
good.
Because if you just have to have a permit, just like you have right now, to be able to do that. The,
A special event permit?
yeah,
Community services.
You could do that with
So
the
for all
food
of those
truck. I
things,
agree
you
with,
could do it with a, because right now what it says no camping.
right. And what we were getting at here, we had a request to be able to put up shade structures or types of tents during the day if people are out there with children or kids and you're having events and it's really hot. So we put that you could do that during the day, but not at night. But the camping can only be done in designated camping areas with a permit.
Okay, so I didn't get that from the statute, because the statute just says no camping. But as long as that's not what it means, I'm fine with it. The other one is for number 6, the bike one is just oddly worded.
Yes, I know.
And so, if you could just figure out a way to sort that out, I have a lot of faith in you and your staff's ability.
Which one?
Number 6, it's just, the wording of it
Oh, I got that
is
too.
just a bit
Yeah,
sort of reflexive, or I don't even know what the way you would say that would be.
negatively framed, it could be positively framed.
Right.
But-
Because there are places that we want people in their place that we don't. But I don't think we would sort of go around the entire desert putting signs everywhere.
Right.
I think we would do the opposite. We'd put signs where we want it and then assume everywhere else is not okay. So maybe something related to that. And then the other thing I would say is I'm glad we're doing the preserve, but the biggest concern I have is that the code can be changed by 4 people.
Right.
And so my concern is always that it's gotten no harder in some ways to do what people are afraid of. And so I would love it if you could brainstorm a way to, because you said you want to freeze time, and I 100% agree with you. Or I think maybe one of the
That
speakers
wasn't
did.
me.
One of the speakers said that. So I would love it if we could make it somehow harder to change these preserve rules, whether that's a supermajority on council, whether that it first has to get a majority on a citizen committee, like the Parks Board, so that there's a higher barrier to changing what can and can't be done in a preserve.
And I think
isn't that
that's,
already covered under the federal one we have?
well, not exactly, because it's the code that's really setting up the uses. And the council does have the opportunity and the right to be able to make changes to the code. If you couldn't, if we put that in the charter and we found we needed to have extra
You don't want to put it in the
policing.
charter.
Right. So I think you're expressing a comment by a number of people who were at the public meeting. I think there's a fear that the council can kind of do whatever they want because they can change the code. And so I think it would be up to you to maybe give us guidance on what would be appropriate in terms of voting on.
I appreciate that. So just to give you an example, Mayor, so under the federal rules, as long as it's being used for a city purpose, we're fine with the federal land grant. That could be a prison. I mean, a city prison, right? That would be part of a city. It could be a city recycling plan. It could be whatever. And the only thing we would have to do to make that so is have 4 people on council who voted to say preserves don't allow archery or amplified sound, but they do allow prisons. And if we edited this language, I don't think we would do that, of course, but if some future council did that, it would only be 4 votes to edit the city code in a way that was still in compliance with federal rules. And so my thought is if we could make it a 2/3 vote to change it, that way we still have the flexibility to do things when they come up, but there's not, there's a higher bar to reach.
There is, though, a limitation of sorts in terms of what you can and can't do. Do you want to?
By the language of the charter, right.
Yeah, yeah.
It says
So-
that it shall be
So
preserved
it
its
is-
natural state to the maximum extent
To the
practicable.
maximum, right.
And tuition shall be as free as possible.
I don't know how a prison would ever be a natural state unless you just had like
Exactly.
a stand of Ocotillo holding people back.
But when Jocatiel's around and they can't get out?
So there is protection under
There is.
under the preserve ordinance.
I believe the Roosevelt document talks about recreational purposes, not city purpose, if I'm not mistaken, right, the language?
It's in our packet. I read it last
Yeah,
night.
it's recreational. So are you finished, Councilmember?
I am,
Rogers?
thank you.
So I wanted to ask a question on section 23-101 purpose. And this is a concern I heard expressed at one of the public meetings, and Lassie, I think, is referencing that C, but A preserve will not contain traditional facilities or improvements associated with a public park, but may contain facilities or improvements that the city determines are necessary or appropriate to support its activities. And so I know there were a couple people spoke about needing a little bit more protective language in there. Is there anything we can tweak to with the second part of that sentence to say, as befitting a desert preserve, or, just to give it a little more protective feel?
I'm going to lob that question to Chuck Cahoy, I think, in terms of the legal way of writing that. I think the way the charter amendment's written, it's clear, but I think there is some question about.
Oh, there's Chuck.
Oh, there he is now.
Disappears,
The
just like
the
that.
only thing, like, we wouldn't want to prohibit, for example, let's say a horse
run.
stables wanted to come in.
Right.
It's considered a recreation purpose, as long as it doesn't preempt us from doing that, because if we have a history of that, or some other use, like a food truck for events or what have you.
And I found the language, it's municipal park, recreation, or public conveniences. It's the land grant.
I wouldn't
So-
call a prison a public convenience
Yeah,
necessarily.
but the court did.
Did it say? It said
Yes, the
prison?
court declared that a city prison, a municipal prison, was a public convenience.
Okay.
I mean, for the prison people, I guess.
I hope we're not going there.
No, we're not. That's a little extreme example.
Yeah.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, Councilman Kuby, Chuck Cahoy, Deputy City Attorney. The language of 23-101 sub C that was referenced, number one, it's existing city code. It wasn't amended or suggested to be amended by the Parks Advisory Board. So it's existing language. I think it was probably written this way originally because of the water tanks, et cetera, on Hayden Butte, which is currently our only preserve. Certainly, any city code can be drafted more tightly if that's what the council wants. I think we do have to recognize that even though there's an effort going on to remove facilities from a mound, the first part of this would strictly prohibit it, which is a little bit beyond our authority right now. And so I think there's some balance that's probably necessary, but we can draft it obviously however council would desire.
And it's important to know that the language there, we were bringing you the board's recommendation. So it is up to you to decide if that's appropriate or if you want to make changes.
Okay.
Maybe that's the place where there could be a supermajority needed
I
to
think
make
that'd be appropriate.
change. Is that something that council wants to entertain, for that?
Give them direction.
Yeah.
When they bring it back with a revision.
Wouldn't the state constitutional order require a supermajority for something that's pursuant to a charter election anyway? Under the voter
Is it
protection
already
Act?
covered?
Yeah, that's my question.
Three-fourths. State, not city.
That applies to it.
Does it apply to
Protection
state?
Act in three-fourths.
I think only if this was found to be inconsistent with the charter, then yes. If
If it does that, then we have to follow the supermajority, that's.
Okay.
And then, I'm sorry, Councilman.
No, go ahead.
No, I have another question, so.
I was just going to point out, as one of the members of the public noted about the sunshine ordinance during the public comment, that of course the ordinance can be adopted at any time by council. So it could be that you want to study this a little bit more. The real driving timeline here is for the charter reference on November 9th. So if you want to study this further, we can certainly do additional work on it.
Thank you. And then there's another, when we have mention of smoking, can we also include e-smoking? So it's clear that the restrictions on smoking include e-smoking?
That would reconcile with our other ordinances.
And then thirdly, when we prohibit now the use of, for e-bicycles can go in the park, but they can't use their motor assist. So do we need to have something, and this obviously isn't in the charter, but mention that e-bikes are allowed, but motors cannot be.
That goes back
That's
to that
ordinance, then.
rather challenging language about non-motorized versus motorized, yeah.
Because we also like segways, or segways be allowed, right? Right now, it doesn't seem to allow use of segways.
We can't prohibit segways by state statute.
Right, so don't we have to adapt the language to reflect that? I'm
I
looking
mean,
at
if we ever
20
tried to cite someone, we would lose.
Right, so we look at
Segways are treated like
23-111,
pedestrians.
item 6. Pardon?
I was just going to say, this is, if we're going down this road, I think these are the situations that if we have an ordinance to govern that, if we have a problem in those areas, we have the opportunity to govern it.
Right.
I don't know
Yeah.
if we have to take a full chunk of it right now, because there's a lot of speculation on down the road, what is going to happen and what's not going to happen. I think that.
I'm just trying to line up with our current law.
No,
Current ordinance.
Can we just reference, Mayor, can we just reference our current law on that topic instead of
Yeah,
putting anything about it in there? Yeah.
About smoking.
No, about bikes.
Mhm. E-bikes and
Yeah, just reference our current.
motorized vehicles. Okay, all right.
It's very nuanced, and we put a lot of work into it, as
Yeah.
Robin and Lauren can attest to.
Oh, yeah.
All right,
That's it. So, yeah, very supportive.
good. We're all supported. Move forward.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. Any future agenda items for the issue review session from council? Seeing none? All right, we're going to go right into the committee of the whole.
Because I suggested 2/3.
We do have another call to the audience. If you have already spoken on the item that's going to be on the committee of the whole, you already used your moment of your 3-minute time slot. Is there any additional people that would like to speak on any of the items listed on the committee of the whole? Could you please get my attention? Yes, please come forward.
There, we're votes away from building a prison anywhere already.
Right.
I'm just saying, as long as they're able to make the
Sir,
preserve, might as well matter.
Are you going to vote against every development deal that doesn't specify that?
Okay, Kaylee Orick. Come and please state your name and place of residence for the record. Right here.
Someone come to speak about this on
My name is Kayla Orick, and I live on 13th and Ash, 61 West Hudson. Sorry. Our city it's growing, and I do believe it is our duty to make sure that it grows in a responsible and transparent manner. And I believe the way to do this, because our city is of people, for people, and it must be run and grow according to those people's needs. And I truly believe that the transparency bill would allow for city growth in a responsive, transparent, to repeat myself, manner, and that it is increasingly important for the public to be involved in these civic affairs. It would increase transparency of campaigns, which would inspire trust from engaged citizens, something that is severely lacking in today's politics. Give them and not to mention it would provide for fair play among running opponents, or lay the groundwork for. I know it's an optional bill, but I think it's the first step to political transparency, which is so important. I believe that the biggest, my biggest plus for this is candidate trust. To know that your city council member is working for you and lives in Tempe and wants the best for it. I truly believe that, and not the best for businesses that may be coming into Tempe. I think that would be a great part of this bill. So, thank you.
Thank you. Next is Tyler Chandler, and then on deck, Nick Weller. Please state your name and place of residence for the record.
Hi, Tyler Chandler. I live at 2810 North 70th Street.
Tempe.
I'm not in Tempe, but I do work in Tempe. Like the individual who said before me, I think this transparency bill is a no-brainer. I just can't see a situation where anonymous funding in an election is a benefit to the residents of the city. I think if an organization or a company or an individual wants to support a candidate, let them say it publicly. I don't see the need for the anonymousness of it. I think that's about all I need to say on that. I think the bill speaks for itself. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Weller. Please state your name and place of residence for the record.
I'm Nicholas Weller. I live at 1214 South Farmer Avenue, just south here.
I'm also here to discuss the Sunshine Ordinance or the Transparency Bill. I mean, like Tyler said, I think this is a no-brainer. I study politics at ASU, and I work at ASU doing that. We try to do public engagement where we bring people together to sit face to face and have real conversations about the issues we're facing. And while that's very different from city council elections, of course there's the same kind of ideals I think that we should strive for in terms of transparency, in terms of accountability, in terms of our ability to trust what we get as constituents to make decisions about the big issues that face our city. So I think, like Tyler said, this is a no-brainer. I just wanted to voice my support for it.
Thank you. Next, Zoe Stein. Hello.
Hi, everyone. Zoe Stein, 1010 West 17th Street. So, like everyone who just spoke before me, I think putting this on the ballot in March would be a no-brainer. I personally am incredibly concerned about the increased presence of dark money, especially at the local level. Lack of disclosure and independent expenditures, I think becoming an increasing problem in our community is terrifying. I also have no doubt that this will continue to be an issue as time goes on, considering that it seems to be the case throughout the country. The risk of a lack of action and the cost of inaction is tremendous. I think that it would mean seeing Tempe's local elections be nastier with increased ad hominem attacks. I think we'll lose a lot of legitimacy in our elections due to inaccurate information being spewed. So if you could support this initiative to move it to the ballot for March and let the voters decide and keep our campaigns transparent and clean, that would be awesome. Also, I think it's incredibly cool that Tempe would be the first city to do this and, again, innovate and set a path forward for our fellow Arizonan cities. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience wishing to address us on any items listed on the committee of the whole? Could you please get my attention? Seeing none, close that portion of the meeting. Item number 1, campaign finance reform. Ms. Higgins.
Mayor and Council, Elizabeth Higgins, Chief of Staff to the Mayor and Council. A city manager's working group has been focusing on campaign finance reform and has been looking at the issue of disclosure and independent expenditures. The working group collected feedback on a charter amendment and an ordinance as proposed in the attached to the agenda that would require the disclosure of major contributions from original and intermediary sources to be when they're used to influence city elections. We had both a stakeholder meeting and a public input meeting over the last few weeks. Those comments are also attached to the agenda. The accompanying amendment would be adopted by the council at the same time as the charter amendment if it's referred to the ballot, and would go into effect if the charter amendment was approved by the voters and then signed by the governor. The accompanying ordinance is currently titled the Sunshine Ordinance, and it would establish additional requirements that are already on the books when it comes to candidate and political action committees. Specifically, it would require a person, association of persons, or entities, not a political action committee or a candidate committee, that makes expenditures of $1,000 or greater to influence the result of a City of Tempe election. That they would have to disclose the original and intermediary sources of major contributions attributed to that expenditure during the election cycle. A major contribution is defined as anything with a monetary value of more than $1,000 in the aggregate from a single source used to influence a City of Tempe election. There are a couple of exceptions in the language of the ordinance. One is if a donor has restricted their funds, their donation to non-election related uses, they would not have to disclose that contribution because it wouldn't have been used. Also, the names of persons contributing less than $1,000 during the election cycle, and the names of contributors if the expenditure is made using membership dues or fees made consistent with a dues and fees schedule published at least 2 years prior to the contribution. The disclosure of the original source or the intermediary source would include their name, address, employer, amount, and the date of the major contribution. The disclosure must be made to the clerk within 48 hours of the expenditure, and supplemental disclosures are also required within 48 hours for expenditures that are over $1,000 or more in the aggregate. The person would disclose by using a disclosure statement form that would be filed electronically with the clerk under oath and penalty of perjury. And then the clerk would have 2 working days to post that online. There is a complaint process and appeals process also in the ordinance. The complaint allows for a complaint to be filed with the city clerk within 90 days of the election for which the expenditure was made. The clerk then has 2 days to notify the city manager, who determines that if true on the face that it would be a complaint or a violation, that they would notify the person that made the expenditure or the entity. That person would either have 10 days to respond, 10 calendar days to respond, or if there was no response, the city manager would assess a civil penalty of up to 3 times the amount of money or equivalent, like in kind, spent during in the violation. Appeals would be to the city manager and then to the hearing officer and the Superior Court, and the civil penalties paid would go into the general fund. Happy to answer any questions, any clarifications. I know it can be a complicated issue.
Councilman Granville.
Thank you, Mayor. So I spent a lot of time going through this because it's obviously a big deal. It seems like a great idea. I think it probably is. There were a couple things I just wasn't sure about.
Okay.
And so the thing that would make it easiest for me is if you could maybe put together, before we vote on this, just a list of like, in this scenario, do you tell anyone? Yes. In this scenario, do you tell anyone? No. So that I can see sort of a list of like all of the permutations of how this might work. And I can give you an example of one that I just genuinely don't know the answer to. So if it was, for example, the real estate people, they're all due paying members. And so the real estate organization might want to do a mailer to its own members. In that case, they wouldn't have to disclose it because they are due paying members and they're using those dues to then just simply tell their own members. They're not doing a general mailing to the population.
Mm-hmm.
But there are other variations of that that I don't know. So for example, let's say, I don't know, Intel wanted to do an email to its employees or a mailer to its employees or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're not dues paying members, I have no sense of, number one, do they have to report it? And number two, I just don't know the answer, that's all. And so I'm just trying to figure out, the way it was intended, that's the easiest one, right?
Yeah.
A bunch of people get together, they take money, they spend money, something shows up in your mailbox, or they take out some Facebook ads. It's the sort of self-contained organizations that are letting, or let's say undergraduate student government wants to take out, wants to do something, and it goes through the ASU servers. I have no idea how you would even begin to scope if that was over $1,000, because the servers already exist, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or if ASU could even do that, or it's those sort of like, if you could just sit down with a couple of harebrained people, I could be one of those harebrained people if you want,
Okay.
and just think of all of these sort of variations to make sure that we've covered everything, so that somebody is just trying to sort of help and unknowingly violates the rules that they don't even know exist.
David, then Lauren.
Thank you, Mayor. This is certainly a complicated issue, which is why we have very smart staff who would be charged with implementing it if the voters pass it. But I think it's a simple question. And the question is whether or not you think that the voters of our city have a right to know who's influencing our elections. Now, there's some issues that have come up throughout the process of discussing this, as I said, somewhat complicated issue. And I just want to address some of those questions that members of the public have had from my perspective. And one of those is the legal question. And the legal question really has 2 parts. One is there's a concern of the preemption capabilities of the state. Certainly campaign finance laws nationwide right now are crazy. I mean, crazier than it's ever been in American history, certainly not what the founders envisioned. But we are certainly in Arizona, the Wild West of a lot of things, including campaign finance laws. And so there's some concern that the legislature might preempt or already has preempted in some ways our ability to collect this information. And I just want to cite to the very recent decision in the Tucson gun case, where the state Supreme Court, mind you, a pretty conservative court, ruled against the city of Tucson, but in the dicta in that case made very clear that it was their belief that cases dealing with real property and elections were of what they call uniquely local concern. And what that signals to people in the legal community is that if a city is going to pass an election or a real estate related ordinance, and the legislature were to try to preempt us, that in a charter city, we'd win the case, even with the court that we have right now. The other issue that I've heard raised is concerns about, or First Amendment concerns, which most of the cases that have gone to the United States Supreme Court or to any federal court relating to election laws have centered on the First Amendment and individual and corporate rights when it comes to speech, which they term as expenditure, which the Supreme Court has said expenditure of money even by corporations is considered speech protected by the First Amendment to the Constitution. But in the landmark case that said, and there's a whole string of cases, but in the most famous one, which says that money is speech and corporations are people, Citizens United, Justice Kennedy, who authored the majority opinion, made crystal clear that despite the fact that a majority of the United States Supreme Court was saying money is speech and corporations are people, they believed that the solution to that perceived problem, for those of us that think that that's a problem, is, quote, to regulate corporate political speech through disclaimer and disclosure requirements. So the United States Supreme Court, in the decision that made it possible for corporations to spend unlimited money in political campaigns, the majority opinion made very clear that measures like the one we are trying to pass in our city are the solution to the perception of the fact that there is a problem when it comes to corporations spending large amounts of money on political campaigns. So I believe that the legal arguments, both at the state level when it comes to preemption and at the federal level when it comes to the Constitution, that both of those courts have made clear to us that we are on solid ground in terms of our legal foundation. The other argument that I've heard out there is burden. And one of the questions I've gotten from a lot of folks, people who've been involved in my campaigns, others of your campaigns over the years, was burden on candidates. And just to be crystal clear, there isn't one. There is no additional burden on candidates or their campaigns or their treasurers or their people who do their accounting. That is not touched by this measure. There is an additional burden on people who want to make independent expenditures to influence elections in our city. And my response to concerns about that burden on independent groups is those groups, in order to operate for their purpose, which most of them, if they're corporate entities, their purpose is to make a profit, serve their customers, etc. If they choose to engage in political campaigns within our city, which is their right, according to various majority opinions from the Supreme Court, all we're asking is that they disclose what the original source of the funds are in ways that candidates are already required to do. Why wouldn't we require independent groups to disclose origins of money when we require candidates to do the same thing? And so my belief is that we stand on sound legal ground. The burden is not undue, and we have, I believe, a responsibility to our constituents to ensure that the voters of our city know what the origins of funds are that are being spent to influence elections for your elected representatives. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilman Kuby.
So there's been an evolution on this group, Campaign Finance Reform, and we started, we had lobbyist registration for the first time in Tempe. So those lobbying the city of Tempe are required to register now. We have some strict rules. We learned from some of the issues that Phoenix had, and we made those rules stricter and more defined. And then we moved on to lobbyist disclosure. So if you're a candidate, you accept money from a lobbyist, you're perfectly entitled to do that, but you now must list the lobbyist, how much you raised from that lobbyist, and the date and amount. Then we, last election cycle in 2016, we put before the voters a ballot initiative to reduce the amount of money you could donate to a campaign from $6,250 to $500. Now, this is, I believe, the next logical step. And we had a rather august figure, Terry Goddard, approach me early in the summer to bring up this, this potential idea that we should go before the voters. We know with our 2016 ballot initiative, it was passed by, I think, nearly 89% of the voters. So I believe this is something the voters would be very interested in weighing in on. This is all to reduce the influence of special interest money in our elections. And I've heard, David, you mentioned some of the questions that you've heard at the stakeholder meeting, and to clarify some issues, one thing I heard was, well, does Tempe really have a problem? And as Terry Goddard pointed out to me, he said the beauty of Tempe leading the way in the state is we haven't had too much of a problem. We've had 4 independent expenditures made in the last,
A couple of them.
I know, well, yeah, in the last, I think there was one for sure for you, the last few elections.
Yeah, it's not, actually
Right,
both.
in the last few elections. So, so this is, we expect this to be a growing problem, and best to nip it in the bud before it becomes a more intense problem. And I also want to point out, you all know about ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, and the way corporate special interests are influencing our state legislature. Well, there's now a new group called ACE, and it's the American and City and County Exchange, and they aim to do at the city level what ALEC has done at the state level. So I expect that we're going to see this continue and this to increase. So to me, I think this is like the next evolution in our movement towards a more transparent Tempe, more transparent government and processes. There was one critique, though, we had at this stakeholder meeting that I want to address with my colleagues, if they're paying attention.
We were talking about what you were talking about there.
And that is, we had a critique that perhaps we shouldn't name it the Sunshine Ordinance. I know this doesn't relate to the charter amendment, but, and I,
Comes with political baggage when you give it a name like that.
Well, when you look at the definition of Sunshine Ordinance, it's a law requiring certain proceedings of government agencies to be open to the public, and this person objected to that, didn't think it was really appropriate to call it the Sunshine Ordinance. I thought it sounded like nice and comfy and just very welcoming and so Tempe.
Call it a contract with Tempe voters.
And not a contract on Tempe voters, yeah. But I mean, I would ask if we don't, I don't know if we have to decide this tonight, but perhaps consider changing it back to the original definition which Terry Goddard had suggested, which is keep dark money out of Tempe elections.
Much better.
And it's very direct to the
What about
point.
transparent?
And it's, yeah, it's a transparent.
It's a much better term.
People would be more apt to vote for that as opposed to sunshine.
We were trying to be nice, you know, trying to.
I support that.
So, and I don't think that would necessarily, would that be in the actual charter amendment, or that would be more the ordinance that we would draft?
It wasn't
for
in the charter amendment, it's in the
Right.
ordinance.
So is there a consensus that we would change that?
Before we do that, though, I
Right, we have
asked
to
for
also-
consensus.
yeah.
But one of the things I think it's important is that we still have we have an executive meeting on this issue coming up, I think, next week.
Sure.
And then it's going to be on the November 9th council. So there's a lot of stuff, moving parts to do that. And we can have that discussion then.
And I just want to reaffirm something David said, and that is that the Citizens United decision, there's one clear statement that I wanted to read as well that said, the First Amendment protects political speech, and disclosure permits citizens and shareholders to react to the speech of corporate entities in a proper way. This transparency enables the electorate to make informed decisions and give proper weight to different speakers and messages. So I think this is in line with a lot of the campaign finance reform measures we've adopted. I really want to thank David Shapiro, Councilmember Shapiro, for serving on the working group with me, and Mayor Mitchell for leading us. I approve this obviously and with great joy, and want to point out that maybe we should call it the no-brainer ordinance, as the students recommended.
I want to say something that, and I want to thank Lauren and David. We're working on a group as well. I think this is something the entire council agrees on, especially when it comes to disclosure and dark money and transparency. It's exactly where we're going, and I think it's important that our residents have an opportunity to vote on a charter amendment of something of this nature. I do know that there's some, I agree with David. This is a very challenging issue from a whole host of things, not just from whether what we call the name of this ordinance, but also with regards to legality and so forth. And I know we're going to be discussing a lot of this at our next executive session, and this is really geared towards, we have another meeting on the 9th. I think that's when we're going to be putting it on the council agenda. And I think it should go to the voters in the city of Tempe, absolutely. And I just wanted to make sure that full disclosure, one of the comments from one of the speakers mentioned that this is about candidates. This is not about us individual candidates. We already disclosed, we're transparent, we already have stuff in place. This is about independent expenditures. And as we move forward with this, this is about independent expenditures that we don't know where the money's coming from. I don't think anyone's going to disagree that people need to understand where the money's coming from, or at least disclose where it's coming from. I think that's what the intent that we're trying to move forward with. And that's part of the comments. I have some other comments, but I'm going to hand it over to Vice Mayor Adriano Savage.
Thank you, Mayor. First, just good job from the working group. I feel like this committee kind of continues to go on and on. So I think that I totally agree. I think the city of Tempe is forward-thinking when it comes to transparency and wanting our residents to be a part of the system and include them however we can. So I don't disagree, and I'm totally open to changing the name, whatever you deem is more appropriate. That's totally fine. I do just have a couple of questions, and I'm thinking that we can get this as we move forward too. So I just want to clarify, because I think I want to put the whole thing into perspective. And I appreciate some of the comments that I heard in regards to making sure that we have, solid legal ground if there is a case, a lawsuit that comes forward, which probably most likely will happen. It'd probably be good to know what has happened in other scenarios. I do know, as Terry Goddard had also approached Tucson. I'd be curious to know why Tucson declined to move forward with that. And I just want to know if there's any correlation to the case that they had in regards to something I think David mentioned, the gun case. I'd like to know what they spent to be able to get through that. I think it's just really important that we understand that there are going to be some consequences, positive and some negative ones, that I just feel like we need to be upfront and transparent with our residents so they really understand, like, hey, you know what, we are going to go to bat, this is what we're going to do. I love the idea if we could get other cities to be involved and engaged. I know that I think it was Morgan that mentioned a couple of other cities that have recently implemented this. I think one was Austin and one was Denver. I'm not sure, but I think Texas recently went into special session to preempt local ordinances. So I'd like to get a little bit more information on that, just kind of see where they're going, what that looks like. And if it has been successful in other cities, have those cities received support from their other surrounding region or their state? I'm just looking for other ideas to be able to band some more of us together to be able to go down that road. So if that's okay, that'd be really great. Again, yeah, thank you. Thank you guys for your work.
Randy.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to applaud the working group and their partners for bringing this forward. We haven't seen an influx of dark money into the city of Tempe quite yet, but I do feel like that's something that will be coming in the future. The state legislature and the federal government don't seem to have any interest in curtailing the negative effects of dark money in any elections. So I do believe that this is one of those, it's not a solution in search of a problem, it's a solution to preempt the problem. I think that will be, we're going to preempt dark money. We're going to start preempting the legislature around here. So I'm very pleased to see this come forward, and I will be supporting moving it forward. Thank you.
So direction is, we have another meeting.
Mayor,
Oh, Joe.
it's all been said, but
Sorry.
I just
Joe's on
want
the
to say
phone.
thank you to the working group. I think they did an outstanding job, and it's been said.
Yeah, what he said. You're here.
All right. With that, I mean, we're moving forward. I know we're going to be we're going to bring back, this is going to be an executive session that's going to be scheduled on the November 9th agenda, I believe, is what we're looking at.
Scheduled for the October 26th E-session
Oh, yes.
and the November 9th to come back with all the other two things that are being referred to the ballot, the Papago Park and the
Right.
election.
Okay. And we'll have a decision then. Thank you.
Play around.
All right. Next item, gentrification survey. This is Mr. Ravo?
Yeah, that's me.
You and I?
It's you and I. That's exactly it, man. And Randy.
And Randy?
Yeah, working hard. So I'll just, I guess, give the quick overview, and you guys can jump in case I miss anything here. About, I don't know what it is now, 6 months ago, that I wanted to, and you guys were nice enough to join me and help, just get my hands around gentrification. It's a buzz term that's pushed around a lot. It has a lot of, again, political baggage that goes with that term, often negative. And I really just felt like it was the kind of thing where it was time that that we got to peer-reviewed journal articles as opposed to, whatever showed up in the New Times that week, and started looking at, what is gentrification? How is it defined by economists? what are the phases that it goes through, what are both the positive and negatives of it, what are the things that people have tried, and when you actually have a control group and look at that sort of view of it, what has worked and what hasn't worked. This is relatively shy on suggestions. There are 3 or 4 at the end. They're all good suggestions. They're not anything sky is falling sort of stuff. But I think the most important thing for me about doing this, and I think the mayor and council member will agree, is I think it begins to give us a common set of terminology and a common starting point to talk about these issues in a way that's a little bit more pro-Tempe based, as opposed to reactive, like buzzword based. And so there are a few suggestions at the bottom. I assume you guys read them. Some of which just by happenstance actually overlap with our next item as well. And that's it. I don't know if I'm missing anything or more to do. I know that there was a lot of reading. There was about 2 feet of reading. Yeah, Randy is like, yeah.
There's a lot of reading, and I want to thank Randy and Kobe, and I know, Kobe, you worked a lot on this, especially with the research. But I think we all know that, as you stated, we're limited by what we can and can't do based on states, laws and how we address basically issues of gentrification and affordable housing. But I think we have some good ideas that come out of that. And I know staff is very sensitive of how we feel about it and how our staff knows that we're looking to get affordable housing, and we're in developments where we can as they come forward to our city. The 4 suggestions I think are made by the group are things that we're already working on or that we're going to be pursuing, especially with the idea of the IDA, to see if that's a possibility.
And one of the things that came out of when this was brought to the Neighborhood Advisory Commission is they said, hey, can we see how this mirrors or doesn't mirror at similar documents that Phoenix or Tucson or someone else in Arizona has done? Much to my surprise, after going through Arizona League of Cities and Towns and sending out some emails, no city has done this. No city has tried to define and explain and get their hands around what this means. So this may become a document that we want to send to other people as their starting point of their discussion as well.
And there's a book, I haven't picked it up yet, and I would encourage the whole council to look at it. It's by Dr. Richard Florida. It's about this very issue of gentrification. He's a great author. I think he goes from good to great. He's done some other things regarding innovative cities. And it's just literally about this issue.
What's it called, do you know? I'll buy it right now.
It's Dr. Richard Florida. I'll get the title. I just heard about it the other day. Actually, through a book club from a zoning attorney. Imagine that. So, okay. So we're going to continue to move forward with the suggestions that we have.
And I think we can close this out after this.
This working group out. All right. Next item is workforce housing.
Yay, finally.
This is Robin and Randy.
Thank
Joel?
you, Mayor. Yeah. Joel, you want to take this? Just kidding.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, really good. I am going to ask, I think Paul and Levon are here too. Oh, yeah, you guys are already here, just so we'll have a seat. So first and foremost, I just want to say thanks to my council colleagues, Randy and Joel, because this has been something that we've been working on for months, like 6 months plus. We've had a lot of meetings. We've gone back and forth. We've included a lot of different affordable housing developers, private developers, and I want to thank our staff, not only Levon and Paul, but also Ryan Levesque, who was awesome, Parrish, that tried to keep us all together all the time, which didn't really work. So I just want to say thank you guys for so much for being consistent, being dedicated, and really trying to do something that I think has never been done. And I think most of you know, when it comes to workforce housing in the city of Tempe, we have absolutely no tools to be able to create more affordable housing in that workforce housing area, let alone keep it that way for a long period of time. So kind of going through our search of trying to figure out what it is we can do, we evaluated what was on the books, and I think recently one of the things that we experienced was that there is actually a fee reduction, if you guys remember this, that we didn't go through too long ago within the code, but there really was no teeth in it at all. So a couple of things that we came up with, or some of the strategies, was to continue with the establishing policies for the fee reduction for the workforce housing. So we like the idea to keep it in there, but we actually put some more teeth in it. And then establish an affiliate nonprofit of the Tempe Housing Authority, and I think I'll let Levon talk a little bit more about that. And expand the existing community assisted mortgage camp program, as you guys know, is one of those programs that really had, I think is really innovative from the city to create more homeownership opportunities for those individuals that probably would not have the ability without the assistance from the city, but to try to find a way to expand those that would be in that 80% to 120%, which we consider workforce housing in Tempe. And then also work with the Tempe Industrial Development Authority to issue bonds that develop workforce housing projects. So really kind of right along with what you guys were doing in regards to gentrification, but we just kind of took some of those ideas and created some really solid working tools that we can implement and use. And I think what's really good is we're able to do them within the context of the things that we already have. And it's not necessarily going to cost us any more money, just a realigning of some of the things that we're doing. And I want to give a big shout out to Levon, because he did a lot of work, a lot of research to figure out what it is that we're doing, what are we missing, where can we actually create some more opportunities for individuals within our community. And just so you guys know too, when it comes to like income distribution in Tempe, like 40% of our residents are middle income. So they're anywhere from $35,000 to $99,000 per household. So, I mean, that's kind of one of the areas that definitely, I think, not only needs some attention, but try to figure out how we can create it long term. So with that, I will let Levon talk a little bit, because it's kind of complicated. You guys have it in your material. I'm sure you read it, but it is fairly long. And I know Levon will do a much better job than I would in regards to some of the recommendations that they're coming forward from community development. I mean, community services. That's what I meant. Thanks, Levon. Go ahead.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Levon Lamey, Manager of Housing and Revitalization. So the affiliate
You're going to have to speak up.
Okay.
Please.
You did so much work, Levon. Come on.
We need you to project if you can.
Project.
Got it. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Levon Lamey, the Manager of Housing and Revitalization. An affiliate nonprofit, in its simplest form, is a 501c3 that has a direct relationship with the Housing Authority. There are some distinct benefits to this relationship. It has a separate board that the Housing Authority Governing Board can establish, but it does not have to be the Housing Authority Governing Board, specifically being that, for instance, we would ask that maybe 3 of the Housing Authority Governing Board are on this board, and then 2 resident members, or 2 members of the community are on this board, so that there is a general oversight of this, with the management of the nonprofit being the existing management of the Housing Authority. Part of this, the benefits to this, a lot of the grants that are coming out of HUD, especially if we get into Choice Neighborhoods grants, grants to develop seniors housing, folks with disability housing, have specific preference points for affiliate nonprofits who are under the control of a housing authority. The other is it allows us to more fully leverage the existing funding of CDBG, home, and the guaranteed income stream that a housing authority has when we go out for longer term financing for either public and private partnerships, fully HUD financed housing, or some blend of them. Part of this also allows for a decrease in the affordability terms. Under the CDBG guidelines, we set a minimum of 5 years affordability period. If we went with some of the more traditional and regular methods we've been using, the amount of subsidy we put into a project determines the affordability period, which can be anything from 5 years all the way up to indefinitely, depending on how much money we put into it. So this allows for a shorter affordability restriction, 49.51% income blend in this unit. So we're also not only creating affordable housing for folks 50% of the AMI or below, but we're also reaching into the workforce housing demographic and creating essentially both housing types at the same time. Part of this also, it allows for long-term and permanent control of these complexes. So in some of the developments that we've done recently and in the past where we've RFP'd out properties that have been for affordability, after the 5-year or 10-year affordability period passes, that housing is no longer required to stick with the income restrictions. Under the affiliate nonprofit, we can dictate that it is permanently affordable, 5 years, 10 years, 15. And we also have the ability to adjust the blend once the initial 5-year affordability restrictions come off. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, you did a really good job. Paul, did you have anything that you wanted to add? No, I would say that, to me, that was just being really creative and I thinking outside the box, which almost makes me think it was something that we had been doing before, right? Because, I mean, it really does open up some doors and give us a little bit more flexibility when it comes to offering different type of housing. So not only are we really addressing workforce housing, but we're also doing subsidized housing at the same time, because obviously we've learned that we can leverage one over the other, and that's certainly the way to go. And the only thing I kind of wanted to point it out too, I think Levon did a really great job with that, is I love the fact that we're talking about the 9-year term for qualified housing units too. I don't know if you mentioned that a little bit in regards to about how we actually go in and do audits every 3 years to make sure that the housing continues to stay affordable, or workforce housing, whatever it is we've deemed it. But also at the same time, this not only works for new developments, this works for redevelopment, which I think is something that's really, really important for us too. And one of the things that we've actually created was an expansion of the CAMP program, which was a down payment assistance program, and we know that resources are limited. So we were trying to be creative about ways that we could possibly fund it, and we came up with an idea of, you guys may remember that we have the shared living houses that we've had for a really long time, and now they're getting renovated and getting ready to be leased out. We thought maybe we could use half of those, maybe a couple of those that we're actually getting lease payments to kind of put together to start building upon the dollars to be able to put down for that CAMP program. And that would not eliminate anything that is needed for those houses, because obviously that maintenance and the upkeep comes first. So that was just kind of an idea of maybe using a portion of that to put aside to be able to use that to start establishing a CAMP program expansion to workforce housing, to address the workforce housing. So anyway, those are our tools that we came up with after many meetings, lots of reading, and a lot of research. And again, thank you. Randy, I don't know if you have anything you wanted to add.
No, I think you covered it all. Thank you.
I guess I can tell you, it's just kind of one of those things that's really passionate to me. Having, growing up with 2 teachers, I realized that we have a population of people that probably could really benefit, that are living in that 80 to 120%. And so I'm, really happy to be able to bring this together. And I can't thank the committee enough for their work and time and effort to bring these really good tools and ideas to us.
So is
Mayor?
Joel.
Oh, sorry, Joel. Yeah, Joel.
Yeah. I'm that guy up here. Just real quick. Yeah, it was an awesome job. I think this is really important. What's really encouraging, I was speaking with a variety of developers, and they have actually brought this issue up on the lack of workforce housing and knowing that there's a need for workforce housing. And that's where, obviously it's encouraging to see they understand the market. They understand the millennials. They understand, our ability when we develop a downtown area, that we need workers that need to live in that downtown area and have the affordability to do that. And I think there's some great takeaways, and I think even to engage with other developers on needs to accomplish these tasks and needs to make sure that that we can reach out on the private sector to really kind of formulate even a better plan. So I think what our work group did was outstanding. The redevelopment stuff, that was a topic that came up on how important that is, and to use redevelopment to encourage workforce housing. One of the things I really liked about when I was at this conversation with these developers is they were like wondering what cities are out there doing this, what cities are out there talking about this issue. They need to talk about it. And I was the only one that could raise their hand and say, you know what, Tempe's doing it. And we're already doing it right now. And I actually invited them to come down Thursday. I don't know if they're there in the audience or not, but it was really encouraging. And I feel like there's support behind this. So I'm proud of the group.
Thanks, Joel. I just want to really give a shout out to, because Sonia was also involved in our committee from legal, and Ken Jones, we drug him in because we thought it was really important to get some of his thoughts and ideas and kind of keep us realistic as we move forward. So anyway, again, thanks to everybody. So that's it, Mayor.
All right, so I believe there's consensus to move forward with utilizing these strategies that are identified in the memo for the workforce housing strategies. Is that consensus? Okay, moving forward. All right, next item is small house community, otherwise known as tiny house accessory dwellings. And Ryan?
You should have one.
Some of you will fit in it.
Kids might.
Mayor, Council. My name is Ryan LeVake, Deputy Director in Community Development. Back in January 5th, 2017, we first brought this IRS topic forward regarding incentives to limit R3 zoning development. One of those topics specifically was about accessory dwelling units. At that time, the council deferred this item to the Small House Community Working Group. Over that time, we've met a few times, discussed proposals, draft ordinances, and then we went to the Neighborhood Advisory Commission to get input on this topic. They recommended us getting further community feedback, and we developed a Tempe forum back in mid-September to get input on the draft proposal and where this area could be imposed for regulations. The additional feedback from that, we went back also to the Neighborhood Advisory Commission to kind of share the results and input on that and have attachments for you on the memo. And just to kind of give you a brief overview of what the outline of the accessory dwelling unit ordinance basically explains. That the proposal is specifically for proposing an accessory, a smaller dwelling unit, no more than 600 square feet livable area space within a multifamily zone district that has a single-family dwelling on the property. Meaning right now today, most multifamily domes can have second or third dwelling on the property, but this proposal is looking at a smaller, less impactful development on the site. The reason to benefit for that was give them some incentives to expedite their process and basically treat them still as a single-family product or single-family home. Some of those benefits include just going to building permits, complying with your current existing development standards, setbacks, heights, lot coverage, and then being able also to take advantage of the residential rebate program. Something if you have a property that's older than 20 years, you can still use some of those reinvestment funds to put back into your property in your home. Some of the additional provisions proposed in an accessory dwelling unit include no requirements for parking. Certainly there's an option still to include parking on the site, but we give the option discretion to the resident to determine if they need that parking or if they just don't want to create additional parking or traffic within that property itself. The community feedback, we received a lot of input on it, over 195 respondents to it. 72 specifically commented in the Tempe forum listing, as well as we used Nextdoor and some Facebook comments. The majority of the survey results indicated there was support for the ordinance draft request, 42%. We had 13% that were not sure. I always find when we're trying to explain the ordinance request, it always takes some questions and answering to kind of understand what it is, what it does. And then after talking with folks, Neighborhood Advisory Commission, to kind of get a better understanding of what the ordinance is about. It's intended specifically to be multifamily, so it's kind of a unique area. We've identified certain map areas like Maple Ash, Wilson Arts and Garden, some pockets in the Riverside Neighborhood Association in East Rio, for example, is areas that have multifamily zoning that still have single-family product on the site. Some of those properties do have multifamily, and so they would not be eligible for this property.
And I'm glad you brought this up because I remember years ago we had an issue with accessory dwelling units in the very neighborhoods you're talking about because there's some unintended consequences about they're doing it just to rent it out to an HU student or what have you, and it creates more of an issue. Have we looked at that? Because reading the memo, no one says it. So like if an investment company comes in and buys it, let's call it Lawrence Rental Properties Tempe, okay? And then she goes and she has multiple properties that she buys and then she gets the information or she gets the rebates or what have you to build an accessory unit. All it is doing is adding more multifamily within a neighborhood. Is that really our intent? I just want to make sure that we're not having unintended consequences because I remember this was addressed years ago with Maple Ash, with Mitchell Park, or with Sunset, Riverside, Sunset, where I just don't want it to be, I understand the intent and I agree with the intent. I think it's great. but there's always some unintended consequences, some loopholes. I just hope, as we go through the public hearing process, we go through DRC, that a lot of this stuff get vetted out. And I'd encourage you to look at some of the old comments that we had. And part of the reason why Maple Ash didn't want to go to historic designation is because of this very reason. So because of it would change the zoning. No, not because of accessory dwelling units, but it would change the zoning from multifamily. And that was some of the concern because of the properties. Now, that was a long time ago. I'm not saying that that's necessarily what's happening here today, but it's something that I hope we could look at as we go through the process. Because I think this is, and I agree with you, I think it's great. But I just know that there's some history to this. David?
I think what maybe having accessory dwelling units would do to sort of address kind of the problem that you identified is you have places that are zoned R2, and the fear is that some of those places might be old homes that just get demolished and turned into duplexes. We've seen this happen. Whereas with an accessory dwelling unit, you potentially maintain the original house, maintaining the character of the neighborhood, and instead add an accessory dwelling unit at the back of the property instead of converting into duplexes. So are you increasing the residency value of that property? Sure, but I would rather have that. I'd rather have the original house with an accessory dwelling unit than have a duplex. And so I think...
I agree.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is by doing that, you're going to increase the value of that property to do exactly what you want in the future for some other next generation person that purchases that property to do exactly what we're trying to avoid. I'm just don't, I agree with what we're trying to, I think we should move forward. I'm only bringing this up for discussion that we look at this, and I think I'm intriguing Councilman Gramler because I don't want this to have a negative effect on what we're trying to do.
Mr. Mayor, I think it increases the value of the property to the extent that the occupant doesn't feel as compelled to sell out to a developer who wants to build a more intensive development.
Yep, but said Lauren Kuby's property, no, like said your property
Let me
increases
finish.
the value.
Let me finish. So with the Maple Ash issue, because I was intimately acquainted with that, because I had a friend who practically was threatened because she was bringing this up in her neighborhood. She was a neighborhood leader. A lot of the issue there was that they thought R2 would go away. They wouldn't be able to have the property rights to sell out to a big developer and make, the big bucks. And it was just a division between people that wanted that opportunity to sell to a developer and those that wanted to retain the character of the neighborhood. It's important to point out, I think there's only 200 potential properties, or maybe that's just in a that's not all the areas that we're talking about, but I think you mentioned there are about 200 properties this would even apply to, because it's definitely within the character of these neighborhoods that they have accessory dwelling units already, right? This is just
correct, yes.
incentivizing it, streamlining it. They would have the same rules that would apply to single family and not to, R2 development, so it makes things easier and incentivized.
That's correct. And some actually the homes that were identified as, hey, we need to look to preserve these homes and they're single family in character, but actually these units have a second unit already on the back alley. And so this was in keeping with that proposal, and it also coincides with the voluntary downzoning process that's currently out there on the streets, that if you have an R3 or R3R property downzoning to R2, you would still be eligible for an accessory dwelling unit.
So I think it's important to note it's another tool in the toolkit, and I also want to commend Councilmember Granville because you brought up this idea originally in a working group to consider. It got kind of hijacked by the Humble Homes project, and we kind of went back to it when we saw this might be a tool that the neighborhoods would like to look at. But as you can see from the discussion, we do have some more work to do. We need DRC to review it, and we're not prepared to move forward now, but we will soon, I think, in the next couple months. Mm-hmm.
Councilman Granville.
A couple of quick questions of things I'm just trying to sort out in my head. So right now, if I have an R2 property and I want to build on it, I want to make it multifamily, but keep the existing structure, I assume I could do that right now anyway, right? And so, and I don't have to, I could do it two ways. One, I could blade the old house and put up a fourplex or a twoplex or whatever. Or I could just sort of wrap something around it or near it, and that would be fine too. The thing that I thought this was doing is, let's say I live in not an R2 area, an R16 area. Our current rules say I can't build an accessory dwelling unit in the back. I can't put in a kitchen. I can't put in a bathroom, I think. I can't put in a sink. And so you end up with this sort of pseudo shed that mom lives in the backyard, unless you go through all these loops. So I was surprised to see that that part wasn't included in this.
Oh, it's already existing.
No. So in R2 property,
Right.
you can do that already. You can build a multifamily in an R2 property.
Also, single-family property, you can, as long as the person relates. Is that one of the FAQs?
Was that one of the
'Cause
changes I didn't
We asked Ryan
see?
to do some FAQs, and if you have a single-family property, you may be eligible to build a guest quarters, which is an attached or detached building used to house guests of the occupants of the main building or, relatives. It can't be something you rent out, but it can be an ADU.
So I think that's the part. Like I like this. I'm not saying I don't support what you wrote. I would just go, I think, a little farther actually. So if the survey that you guys did, there was I think a majority that wanted it to be for R2, but there was an even greater majority that wanted to apply it to both R2 and single-family homes. And so the greater majority of interest was that it applied to both single-family homes and single-family homes in R2. And the thing that I think this is a good step forward, don't get me wrong, it's given this or nothing, I'll take this. The thing that I would also like to see is sort of look at that. So let's say I live in Hughes Acres or Broadmoor or whatever, and I want to move my mom to the back to a separate place. I still can't do it.
Yeah, you can.
I don't think I can put in a kitchen. I don't think I can put in a bathroom. If I'm wrong, let me know. That means I was told something wrong years ago.
So today in the ordinance, R1 zoning allows you, with properties that have 15,000 square feet or greater lot size, to have a guest quarters.
Right, and what can be in a guest quarters?
Guest
That's the
quarters
question.
can't be rented independently from the main residence. So that means the occupants of the property have to use it for guest purposes. You can kick your son out to the guest quarters if you want, but it's still the family unit or the residents on the property that are
And can you have a
utilizing
kitchen and a
it.
bathroom and all those things?
It's limited to not having a full living quarters, so, and for most additions, but for guest quarters, over 15,000 square feet, they can have a separate room and a full bathroom facility, which would also include kitchen.
Kitchen also.
Yeah, but there's restrictive requirements on there. We do a covenant agreement that they can't rent that separate from the main dwelling.
Well, we did think it wise. We actually had this conversation about should we try and apply it to all, and we thought this is best to do one step forward and see
Yeah,
how many of these get
absolutely.
picked up, because it's only a potential of 200 residents being able to do this.
Yeah, and if it keeps half a dozen
We wanna
places.
make sure we target them and talk to them.
And I absolutely agree. I mean, if it keeps half a dozen places in the next 5 or 10 years from getting where the house is torn down and a condo complex is put up, like it's a success. I think, and don't get me wrong, I would happily move forward with this. I personally would want to see it move forward with R16 zoning as well, just because I think that there are people. I mean, the reason housing is. I mean, this goes back to Robin's committee before, like, and the gentrification paper. Like, the issue with housing prices is supply. It's supply. It's supply, and so there's an entire city of backyard supply waiting to be mined. And so I think if we want to try and create more affordable housing, we have to increase the supply of housing in Tempe.
Okay, That's true. I agree, but to that point, it kind of goes against what we've been trying to do with the gentrification, because by adding the accessory dwelling units, even in an R2, you're going to increase the value of that, which is going to increase the cost. Even though it's R2 and you do that. So what I'm saying is, I'm just thinking outside the box, like, I agree. I think we should move forward with this. I'm just saying, as a devil's advocate, like, just think as an unintended consequence. It could be doing the very thing that we're trying to avoid when it comes to gentrification, because by adding that, you're increasing the value of that. Even though it's zoned R2 and you could put a multiplex there, but you're at the same time, you're also increasing the value, which is gentrification.
I'm going to jump to that point, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's what mine is.
So to that very point, the very gentrification thing that we did, it said causes of gentrification on page 75. The number one cause of gentrification, it's the first one on our list, was tight housing markets, limited housing supply. And so I think if we can, I mean, this is increasing the housing supply. So
I'm
I
not
think if we can
disagreeing,
do it
but-
in other places,
But
all
the
better.
effect is also going to increase the pricing.
But you are disagreeing with, sorry.
Can I just, it would indeed increase the rental value, I believe, of the entire property. But
That's
it would
fine.
not increase the rental value of the house that someone would have rented in the first place. In fact, it would lower it because there's more inventory now. There's more places.
As long
to
as you
rent.
can't sublease it, that's fine. As long as you can't sublease it.
What do you mean by
In
sublease?
R2.
Oh, meaning, yeah, but what would happen is the owner of the property would rent out the
I know,
accessory
I-
dwelling to one person
I'm
and
just-
the main house to someone else.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll talk offline. I don't want to belabor it. I'm just saying, I just feel like there's an unintended consequence here.
Well,
What
I
we're
mean,
trying to do.
What the unintended consequence, I mean, you think about, sorry to bring this up, but the Reese development, no longer the Reese development, but Harmony, that was creating
name.
units at what, like $480,000 each? That's what's
No,
gentrifying and causing
absolutely.
the cost of housing to rise, but adding accessory dwelling units relieves the pressure a little bit, I think. But I do want to ask, bringing up what you said, Councilmember Granville, we do want to take this step first with the R2 properties and those designated areas, but I'm wondering if we can, as part of the process, look at the guest quarters definition and expand that to say we can have a kitchen. It's not, it's
appreciate
still
that.
limited by the number of, the square footage is still limited, but if it is a mother-in-law apartment or granny pod or grandpa pod or whatever they call them, yeah, I don't see why we
You
can't
got to be
have
able
that
to
as
cook
part
and
of
do
it.
laundry.
If we have council.
Yeah, to clarify,
Okay.
accessory dwelling units are allowed to have full living quarters facilities. I was referring to the guest quarter provisions that whether someone is less than 15,000 square foot lot size or greater.
But could we expand the guest quarters definition for the single-family properties outside of the
You mean
sing-
that would open it up to more properties that could have, say, you might have less than 5,000 square foot lot size that could afford someone in guest quarters?
I mean, they wouldn't be eligible at this point to rent those properties, but they'd be able to have them be guest quarters. And that seems very reasonable to include in this initial step.
Certainly, we can look at that.
So 15,000 square feet, by the way, is more than a third of an acre lot. So that's a pretty big lot before you can put, I mean, most of our lots, I assume, are quarter acre lots. At least the one sort of an 85282. So that means that everything in Hughes Acres, everything in Broadmoor, everything in Victory, like all of that can't have an accessory dwelling unit. All of that can't do the thing that we were just discussing. I think they should be able to do that, frankly. So maybe it's just a question of lowering the square footage to the quarter acre size. Maybe that would do it.
We'll certainly evaluate that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, planned area development extension request. I believe that's Colby and Randy.
I'll jump in on this one again, and again, Randy can help me with the things that I forget, which I'm sure will be a few. Back again.
Assign them to.
You want to do? Am I doing this or are you doing?
You're
this?
doing it.
Okay, I'm doing it.
Here for support.
All right, I'm going to need it. So this is. I hope you read this one in detail because this is a little bit of a complicated one, truthfully. So the issue that we've had 4 or 5 years ago, we put in a rule that said after 2 years, PAD or development agreement was eligible for expiration, which is why we periodically have these votes where we extend them. One of the feedbacks that I've gotten from developers and landowners is that's a really tough cloud that holds over your property, because when you go to an investor or you go to a bank and they say, do you have the PAD? Your answer is, yeah, but. And they go, what do you mean, yeah, but? And you go, well, yeah, I've got it. It's fine. But in 2 years, it might expire. It doesn't expire. It never will expire. They hardly ever expire it. But it could. And that becomes a very awkward conversation with a bank or with an investor. And so I wanted to try and fix that problem. But equally true, I wanted to fix the problem that frankly came out of our discussion by the foundation building, on the corner, the church that.
College Street Deli.
Yeah, College Street Deli, right. So when we.
Maxwell.
So they ended up kicking everyone out of there, and then shortly thereafter trying to unkick them out.
Wait a second, that's not, some of them, their leases were up.
Yeah, exactly. They just didn't renew their lease. No, they didn't kick them out. They didn't renew their lease. That's exactly right. In the expectation of a PAD, that never came. And then when they told those people, "Hey, can you come back?" They were like, "Nah, the place is already starting to get tore up because people are in it. The air conditioning stripped, whatever." We had the same problem with Donnell Plaza, right? We had it. We had tenants whose leases, as they expired, we let them go. And now, even if we wanted to re-lease that area in the center of Donnell Plaza, we couldn't. So there were a couple things we were trying to fix. One is to encourage developers to keep tenants as long as possible until they are ready to break ground. And so the thought is this. So let's say, I'll give you an example. So let's say a developer comes to us and says, hey, I want a PAD. What we would then tell them is, look, your PAD isn't going to expire in 2 years. The clock never starts ticking. Never. So long as you keep your tenants in there. And if you keep your tenants in there, there is no 2-year expiration. Now, you might have to make them month to month because the time may come when you want them out of there in a hurry because you're ready to break ground. And if you don't, if you want to just kick them out, that's fine. We still have our 2-year expiration the way we've got it now. But if you don't want that expiration, just keep your tenants in there. Keep, half of them in there, 2/3 of them in there. Keep a percentage in there. The other option is, if you don't want those tenants in there, just make it useful in some way to the city, or to the community. I shouldn't say to the city as in city government. So maybe that's a question of just, you put some vinyl in the window that shows, McClintock High School art students stuff. Maybe you put a...
Even if it's vacant?
Yeah, if it's vacant, right. So you just put a vinyl in the window, or maybe you put a couple of art displays in the window that face out the window that you rotate every couple of months. Just something, right? And if that's the case, again, your PAD never expires. So that gives them some incentive to get what they want, security for lenders, and something we want, a property that doesn't look like blight, right? And again, if they don't want to do any of this, they don't have to do any of it. They can just go through our usual process. But if they want to, they could do this. The other option is, let's say it's a vacant parcel, like the Long Wong site. If you don't want a PAD or a development agreement, you don't have to talk to us at all. It can be vacant forever. But if you do come to us for a PAD or development agreement, we're going to tell you, look, this is going to expire in 2 years. And at the end of that 2 years, when you come back and have your discussion with us about is it going to expire, is it not going to expire, first you need to go talk to staff. And as part of that application for the extension, you need to do something with this property. You don't have to invite people on the property if you don't want to, but something. So that could be like what we have on the Long Wong site now, like a couple of benches and some box trees. It could be that you fence it and put artwork on the fencing from McClintock students or Corona or Marcos students. It could be that you put a couple of box trees and a Wi-Fi hotspot. It could be that you use it as a food truck area once a month or a staging area for construction going next door. Whatever's fine. The point is, though, is whatever you do, you shouldn't have to hire an architect or have someone stamp your stuff to do it. It shouldn't be that complicated. So what we came up with was this idea of what we were calling just like a sushi menu that we'd empower staff to make, so that you, as just a lay person who owns the property or whatever, can go to staff. They'll have a pre-approved list of things. And if you just say, yeah, that bench, that box tree, and that wood chips, that you don't have to hire an architect, you don't have to get a stamp of approval from anyone, and staff will say, yeah, that's fine. And so it literally could be, a very small amount of money and no staff time from either you as a developer or our internal staff. But that way, what we've got is we've got something where, you're interacting with the community and making this property a little more useful to the community. And of course, if you didn't want to do any of this, that's fine. You still got your 2 years. You can still ask for an extension the way you'd normally ask for, you can still do whatever you're going to do. And of course, we'd empower staff to make the ask sort of applicable to the size and space and time of the location of the property, so that we didn't run afoul with any sort of takings clauses. All right, so it's a long presentation, but it's a little bit of a new thing.
No, I think it's good. Go ahead.
Well, I just got a question, and I want to clarify the problem we're trying to solve, and I think I get it. I had to read it a few times.
Yeah, it's tough.
But I guess what I'm trying to figure out, I understand what happened with the Maxwell. I mean, I completely get where you're coming from with that. I mean, because it is empty, but I think the situation is a little bit different because some of those leases are up, and I think as a business owner, it's really hard to make people come and stay in the lease a month at a time. I don't know how realistic that is. I kind of worry a little bit about that. And then you mentioned Danielle Plaza, which to me is completely, I wouldn't even put that in the same category because, and the only reason is, one, We bought it because it was so run down. I don't think we wanted anybody to lease it. I think that was the whole problem, right? It wasn't safe. So my thought is how many PEADs are out there, and what are we trying to solve? Like, besides the Maxwell, it's kind of come and gone already. What else is out there on the books that's going to be coming before us?
So that's a great question. So that's a great question. So first off, this would only apply to new PADs. So if you've got a PAD now, or if you don't want a PAD, none of this applies to you. So let's say the Maxwell now came to us as a new project for a PAD. What we would do is we'd go to them and say, yeah, we will approve it. We're happy to approve it. Don't do anything if you don't want to. We hope you can build in 2 years, or you're going to be back before us again at some point. If you'd rather not have that 2-year issue, go to your tenants and see if you can get them to stay. Or if you can't get them to stay, work with the city and see if we've got a nonprofit or something else we want to put in there. Now, it's very possible that the developer will say, I don't want to do that. That's fine, don't do it. Or it's possible that they'll go to the tenants and the tenants will say, I can't run a business month to month. To which the market will now figure out the sort of way that you value a month-to-month lease. So maybe that developer, in order to buy their surety on their 2 years, go to that tenant and say, look, your rent was $1,000 a month. If it was $200 a month, would month-to-month seem like a better deal? If it was free, would that seem like a better deal? And so, or what if I gave you 6 months to get out and I dropped it to $500? So then the market really decides what that lack of surety does to the valuation of the rent. But the owner has an incentive to do that if they want to, because now they're getting something for it, right? They're getting the ability to go to lenders and the ability to go to investors.
So, well, I guess my thought is, though, too, along those same lines, is do we know what the expense is to the owner of that building to encourage them to keep those tenants in there? I mean, because obviously there's some expenses that they're going to incur, whether it's empty or if it's vacant versus if it's actually occupied. Have you examined that? Being in the insurance world.
Yeah, so the owner would still have to pay for, some insurance, some upkeep. They'd have to do some things, right? No doubt about it. And maybe they would choose not to. And if they choose not to, I absolutely would respect that. But if they choose to get this 2-year sort of cloud over them, then they go and they do what business people do. They haggle, right? They haggle with their tenants and find out what's reasonable, what's not reasonable. I should also mention that we did work with community development and said, would you, if the property owner can't get anyone in there, they still have another option. They can do, vinyls, they can do window displays, they can do artwork, they could put a Wi-Fi hotspot in there. They could also come and work with us and have us use it as an incubator space or put in nonprofits. There are other things, people who are willing to bear that risk a bit more. I should also mention, I didn't mention this the first time, we did take this out to the community outreach. The feedback was pretty positive. We also met with all of the sort of usual developers, Manjula, Nick Wood, Charles Hugh Mantle, Darren Sender. Also talked to some real estate brokers, and it was edited based on their feedback. But the feedback was generally very positive. The things that they had a little bit of concerns about is, I don't want to fix up a vacant parcel and inadvertently fix it into a new property tax code. And so obviously that wouldn't be the case, right? Where you still get taxed as the vacant parcel, even if you, whatever.
Or tear it down later.
Yeah, if you did something
But
right.
I will just say, I mean, I appreciate the fact of getting rid of blight. I don't think anybody wants that in our city, and I think anything that we can do to improve that sounds great. Even though I know it's super complicated, if we can get the buy-in from the community, I don't know why we wouldn't do it. But I would say this, then we just need to be prepared to do it ourselves.
Yeah.
And so Danielle Plaza would fall right into that, and I think we'd have to figure out what that means to us, because I would expect us to have the same rules.
Well, it would apply to us if we wanted a PAD. If we didn't want a PAD, it wouldn't apply to us. This is only on new PADs. But that would equally be true of the lot at Long Long or 8th Street, or if you don't want to deal with us, that's fine. Like, we don't do this.
David?
If I read this right, I mean, it's a tool in the toolbox. Nobody has to do it.
That's correct.
So it's
not a mandate.
It's an opportunity for a business that wants to do it, that sees value in whatever those sunk costs are going to be that they have to do. And so if they want to do it, great. And you know what? We'll find out real quick if nobody wants to do it, because in the next year, if we pass it, in the year after that, no one's taking advantage of it, then it's not done any harm. It's just a worthless tool in the toolbox. So the worst case
Could
scenario
happen.
is it's a worthless tool in the toolbox. But why not create the tool if we all agree that it would be a good thing for someone to exercise?
You know, this kind of piggybacks off of what we did when we changed, like what happened with the arches. So instead of, we don't allow a developer now, similar situation, but the leases ran out on the stuff, the property on College. Like with the arches, for example, they tore it down and they didn't have the financing in place to build what was supposed to go there. So what we've done now is you cannot, when you get a PAD, you cannot tear an existing building out with existing tenants unless you have the financing in place to build the project that you're requesting through a PAD. So we already have that on the books, which is a good thing, and that is, I mean, that's real. So we don't have a scenario repeat itself like the arches. I think this falls in line with that, as mentioned, with another toolbox. So, and then it's not mandate. So move forward.
And I just want to say thank you to Randy, who was really helpful with this, and also the legal. This was obviously an area where there was a lot of making sure we weren't running afoul of anything, and to staff. It was just, you know, it's been going. It's almost a 2-year project at this point, so it's been going a while. Yeah.
Really
All right.
the long-term ones.
Any new items for council consideration under the
I just
work
wanted-
study?
Yeah, to ask about the International Energy Conservation Code and when.
That's coming back. Is it in items in progress or no?
Right. Well, that's supposed to be a future
Oh, okay.
item, issue review item, but there's no time designated for that, about the process for the International Energy Code consideration. So it would be great to have a date for that.
You got 9.
I'm good.
Mayor, Council, Chad Weaver, Community Development. We have a timeline prepared for the general code readoption for 2018. I think we have some information we can provide along with that to you on the energy code. It's coming out, the drafts are coming out even later than the 2018s. So we are, matter of fact, we just met with our reconvened building board today to kind of kick off the effort, although it's going to be some time. But we can get you Friday packet or something, some dates and some ideas of when that stuff would happen.
That'd be fine. Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you.
Items in progress. Anybody have anything?
I do actually have
Okay.
a number of updates. I'll make it quick. Number 2 is animal welfare laws and programs. Councilmember Keating and I are working on this working group, and we'll be reporting back November 2nd, the next work study session, COW, about an anti-tethering ordinance that we're going to propose based on a lot of best practices from around the state and nation, but mostly from the state. And we'll be presenting that and mentioning some other ideas we have going forward. Kudos to Kristen Gwynn, who has been so valuable in constructing a lot of these programs and reaching out to the public. Okay, and then
Go ahead.
the next is a contractor's checklist. That's number 5. And Councilmember David Shapiro and I are working on that. Tomorrow we meet to talk about doing a trade fair with the construction trades and giving opportunity for young people to look at trades in construction and learn about apprenticeship programs and such as we continue on that working group.
In Tempe?
Yeah.
Where at?
Pardon, where is it going to be?
Yeah.
That's what we're discussing tomorrow.
Oh, I thought you said it was tomorrow.
Yeah, oh, no.
the
Whoa,
event.
maybe
I'm
it is.
like,
I better
wow,
check my
didn't miss it.
calendar.
Okay, got it.
And the next is the Housing First approach to homelessness. We're going to put that committee on hiatus for 6 months because one of the things, obviously, we've come around to know deep in our bones is that homelessness is a regional problem. And we have staff has been reaching out to neighboring cities to begin a regional dialogue. And so we want to, and we're convening, actually, Andrew's convening some regional meetings with Human Services staff across, and city managers across the East Valley. We're also talking about our working group fully approves, Andrew, working with AT Still and doing the poverty simulator with our regional partners. We think that would be a great event whenever that can happen. So we're excited about that. And but we realize that we don't want to be at cross purposes with staff, and so we want to take a hiatus for 6 months while they work on these regional approaches to look at rapid rehousing, rapid and permanent housing with wraparound services, and see what approaches are available for Tempe. So we're taking a hiatus and coming back and letting staff do what they do so well. And then, let's see, there's more. Sorry, guys. The Municipal Renewable Energy Target on October 31st, we're having a meeting. This will be our second meeting in the working group, and this will bring all the stakeholders together, including our utilities, the utility partners, as well as the Arizona Sustainability Alliance, Environment Arizona, a class of engineers at ASU that's really deeply involved in the renewable energy target setting, and other partners. So we're excited about that potential, and that's happening in a week or so. And the last thing is the plastic bag ban. You might think you might want to remove this, but I really still want to keep it on the agenda, because right now we have a 1487 challenge that was made by a Gilbert legislator, who is concerned about what Bisbee is doing. Bisbee is 200 miles away from Gilbert, but as Lori Roberts said, is a busybody legislator who's concerned about a bag ban that Bisbee has. And Bisbee, meanwhile, their bag ban was designed by Safeway, and they have full support of the business community who talk about all the gains and all the savings that they've had from that bag ban. So that's being challenged. I think there's just a couple weeks left for Attorney General Brnovich to respond to the challenge by the by the Gilbert legislator. So I want to kind of keep that active, and that's it.
Yep. Andrew, do you have anything?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Just really briefly, immediately before this meeting, we had a media event celebrating the fact that for the 4th year in a row, the city of Tempe has achieved a perfect 100 score on the Municipal Equality Index. Mayor Mitchell was there, a lot of staff that made it possible was there, and I just want to thank this body and our great staff for making sure that we are continuing to be a leader in this community, in this region, state, and nationally in inclusion and equality. So thank you.
All right. With that, have a safe weekend. I do know that we have the Old Settlers picnic luncheon at Arizona Community Church this Saturday. We also have game night, which is getting Arizona involved in neighborhoods. And there's a lot of neighborhood events happening this Saturday, and look forward to seeing everybody. Have a good evening. We're adjourned.